Breathe in, soft and slow. Hold for the length of a heartbeat. Breathe out, even softer. Let your shoulders settle. Let the thoughts in your head drift like snowflakes, light, unhurried, and quiet. Imagine a world exhaling its warmth and welcoming a long, gentle cold. Not a storm that shouts, not a winter that arrives in a hurry, but a hush that spreads across valleys and plains, across forests and shores, until the whole land sounds like silence. The first snows begin in high places. They arrive as delicate threads of light, falling from a sky the color of pewter. What touches the stone lingers. What lingers thickens. What thickens begins to forget the days before it fell. On lonely ridges, the wind speaks in a patient voice. It does not rush or rage. It combs the new snow into low silken waves. The ridges point in the direction of the wind's long journey, like writing practiced again and again until the hand no longer trembles. From above, these waves are soft script, soundless syllables laid end to end across the world. Lower down, rivers slow. Their skin clears to glass. Underneath, water keeps its promise to move, but softly, like a thought repeated without words. When the morning sun leans its pale body over the hills, the ice blushes blue, and fine needles of frost lift from grasses that remember green, and do not ask for it yet. In the forest, there is a new grammar. Each branch carries punctuation, small commas of snow that fall away at the gentlest breath and land without a sound. Deer step through white like readers turning pages. Their hooves leave sentences that trail into the understory and fade. A fox pauses, ears pricked, listening not for noise, but for change. A settling drift, a loosened bark, the almost song of downy flakes brushing against its coat. Over lakes, fog rises in thin scarves and vanishes. Ice grows from the edges toward the center, a quiet meeting that will take days. When a single stone falls or a distant reed taps the surface, the sound travels under ice like a bell rung in a chapel where no one hurries to leave. The day is brief and kind. The evening arrives like a hand smoothing the bedclothes of a child already half asleep. The sky, too, learns new ways to be beautiful. Tiny prisms of ice drift and tilt and catch the sun, and a faint ring, softer than a whisper, appears around the light. Sometimes bright companions stand on either side, echoing the sun's shape. They are called sundogs, patient guardians that walk with the day whenever the air is cold enough to sing. Far to the north, where night lingers long, a green veil begins to stir. The aurora lifts from the horizon like breath you can see, bends and folds, and lies down again in another place. It does not mind being watched. It is the sky's way of telling the earth that even in the deepest quiet, there is dance. Snow keeps a careful accounting. What falls and stays becomes part of a ledger written in whites and blues. The top layer remembers today. The layer below remembers the weak. Deeper down, memories press against memories and soften their edges. Snow becomes fern, and fern begins to think of ice. Time gathers, and because it gathers, it moves. This is how an age begins, not with the door slammed shut, but with many windows left slightly open so the cool can find its way inside. Summer visits and smiles and leaves without unpacking its bags. Autumn lingers at the threshold and then follows. Winter, polite and certain, steps over and settles in the big chair by the window. Outside, the world takes off its shoes, sits down, and listens. On the open plain, the wind writes its long letter to the ground. It smooths what is rough and gathers what is loose. It lays snow gently in the lee of every stone and tuft, building small shelters for seeds and insects and the cool dreams of waiting roots. Under this light blanket, the earth does not die. It rests. It considers. It saves its strength for the slow brightness that will return in another season. A single flake falls on your open palm. It looks like a story too detailed to have been written so quickly. For a moment, it is a perfect geometry, all edges and radiance. Then it becomes water and joins your warm skin and is gone. You have held a tiny piece of the sky, and the sky has taken nothing from you that you needed to keep. At the margin of a high valley, a small crevasse opens. Not a threat, but a page turned back by the wind. Inside, the light is blue, like the inside of a quiet bell. Air caught long ago sits in round rooms the size of raindrops, and every room contains a breath of summer that could not quite let go. The ice speaks in the slow language of wait and time, a language you can learn by standing still. Animals adjust their calendars without complaint. A hare gathers the color of snow. Ptarmigan tuck their feet into feathered slippers. Mice write tunnels through the sub-Niven world, an under-snow city where the air is warmer and the roof is soft and easily repaired. Nothing wastes energy. Everything is careful. Care is how life says yes in winter. Listen to the new music of distance. Sounds travel farther in the cold. A raven's call, deep and bright, steps across the hills and arrives without losing its shape. Somewhere, a branch unfreezes and becomes a metronome for a single hour. Tick, 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 until the temperature changes its mind and the clock closes. At night, the stars seem closer, as if the cold has drawn them down by a small polite degree. They glint above the dark shape of a wood and map paths no one needs to hurry to follow. The Milky Way looks like a road dusted with flour, the kind a baker leaves on a counter after working dough that will rise while everyone sleeps. The universe keeps its kitchen warm. The bread of days will be ready in the morning. You are safe here. The story will not leave you behind. Let your breath match the slow exchange of the land with the sky. In, the snow settles. Out, the ice sighs. In, the wind rearranges a single drift. Out, the night draws its curtains one soft pleat at a time. By dawn, the world has accepted its new terms. Fence posts wear gentle caps. A brook that fought all night to stay open relaxes beneath a lace of crystal and pearls, beneath as if humming to itself. The first footprints of the day belonged to a bird that did not mind waiting for the light. It leaves a dotted line across the yard, pauses, and lifts. And the dotted line becomes a sentence that ends at the edge of the trees. This is a beginning made of small decisions repeated with grace. A cloud decides to snow. A field decides to keep what it's given. A hill decides to lean a little more heavily into the shape that suits it best. Soon, when enough small decisions have agreed with one another for long enough, a glacier will have a name and a route and a purpose. For now, the world practices being quiet. Let your thoughts practice with it. Let one land and then another, and then let them stay where they fall. They do not need sorting tonight. They do not need answers. They can simply be part of the soft coverlet that keeps you warm while the earth writes its long, clear lines beneath the moon. And if a worry rises like a black bird from a hedgerow, watch it fly once around the field and out to where the darkness is no longer emptiness, but rest. It will return later if it must. Most birds prefer morning. The hush has crossed the world. It has found the mountains and the forests, the rivers and the empty places where wind keeps its tools. It has entered towns that do not exist yet, and houses that will hold children not yet imagined. It has pressed its cool palm to the forehead of the planet and said, "Sleep now. I will keep watch." When you're ready, follow it into that watchfulness. Let your breathing grow easy. Let your body remember that it belongs to a world that knows how to rest. The cold is kind. The night is wide. The story has only just begun. Winter stacks its work quietly, but not aimlessly. Each storm leaves a layer with its own texture and grain size. A dry, powdery fall from a cold front lies light as dust. A wetter snowfall packs tighter, with rounded grains. Together they form a column of seasons, distinct at first, then slowly transformed by pressure and time. Near the surface, crystals keep their delicate arms. A week later, edges soften as neighboring grains weld along tiny contact points. This metamorphism is simple physics. Weight increases, air is squeezed out, temperature gradients nudge molecules from sharp corners towards smoother shapes. What began as lace becomes felt. Snow turns into fern, coarser, denser, and faintly granular when you run it through your fingers. There is a height on every mountain where the year draws even. Snowfall gained equals melt lost. Glaciologists call the belt above this balance the accumulation zone, and the faint line that separates it from the warmer world below the equilibrium line altitude, ELA. The name hardly matters for sleep, the picture does. Above the line, last winter's snow survives summer and waits for the next layer. Below it, the season clears its slate. That single boundary decides whether a landscape will keep its white or hand it back to water. Within the accumulation zone, summer does not erase, it edits. Sunlight sculpts the surface into shallow basins, sun cups, and scalloped forms called penitentes, where air is thin and the sun strikes steeply. Meltwater gathers along faint depressions, threads downward, and refreezes as clear lenses. Seen later in a crevasse wall, these lenses glow like thin panes of glass, stacked through the years. Depth brings change. Air pockets shrink into beaded chains. Grain boundaries fuse into broader faces. Under enough overlying weight, the fern crosses a threshold. Voids become rare, crystals interlock, and the material behaves as glacier ice. It is still water, but organized, capable of flowing under its own weight. However gently the slope invites it to move. Movement begins where you might not expect it, on inclines so slight that a walker would call them flat. Gravity is patient. A body hundreds of meters thick does not ask permission. It creeps. The top stretches, the base drags, and the ice column shears. Slow, measurable, inevitable. Where the bed is rough or the gradient changes, stress concentrates. Crevasses open in patterns that sketch the glacier's internal stresses. Transverse rifts where the ice accelerates downhill. Splayed fans where a valley widens. Long parallel cuts where the streamlines diverge. Not all motion is internal deformation. At the contact with rock, pressure and a whisper of warmth create a thin film of water. The ice slides on this film, stops where roughness holds it, then slips again. Rocks, trapped at the base, grind the bed smooth, abrasion, and leave long parallel scratches, striations, that point like arrows in the direction the glacier passed. Larger stones freeze into the base and act like chisels. They pluck blocks from ledges, giving valley walls their crisp, stair-step look. Even in this early age, the surface carries artifacts of distant places. Fine dust, loess, rides wind from far-off dry lands and settles here. Dark specks scattered on the pale. Each grain absorbs a little more sunlight than the ice around it and melts a tiny well called a cryoconite hole. In time, these pinpricks deepen into tidy, coin-sized pools, sometimes hosting small communities of microbes that will sleep through cold and wake again under brief warmth. At scale, the glacier's body sorts itself into bands and zones you could map with your eyes. The higher neve looks matte, like cloth brushed one way. Farther down, the ice becomes blue and luminous, brittle in the cold, but viscous in its depths. A ribbon of darker material curves along the center or edges, medial and lateral moraines, made of stones delivered from valley walls and tributary flows, carried like quiet luggage toward the tongue. Listen for new sounds. As daily temperature swings past through the surface, cracks tick and settle. When buried meltwater drains suddenly from within, a low, hollow gurgle runs underfoot and then fades. On a warm afternoon at the snout, meltwater breaks free as a braided river, paler than ordinary streams, clouded with rock flour, the fine powder ground from bedrock. The river spreads, splits, rejoins, and spreads again across fresh outwash like silver threads laid on a gray cloth. While the ice learns to move, the air above writes its own patterns. Downslope katabatic winds form when cold, Dense air sinks off the ice surface and flows into lower valleys. They are steady rather than fierce, but their persistence sculpts the upper snow into hard-edged ridges, sastrugi, aligned with the wind. A skier crossing them feels the relief like frozen waves beneath the feet, each crest pointing the way the air has traveled for weeks. Summer is not absent in an age like this. It is smaller. A few weeks of long daylight glaze the surface, then step aside. Melt figures etch delicate channels called runnels, a miniature watershed flowing towards subtle depressions and moulins, round, blue wells where meltwater plunges inside the glacier and becomes part of its hidden plumbing. Down there, water seeks the bed, follows pressurized tunnels, and sometimes vanishes into temporary lakes, waiting for a pressure change to release them in a sudden jukkelhlap, a word as soft as the flood is swift. All this starts with one simple condition. More arrives than leaves. Snow that doesn't melt is not stubborn. It is cumulative. It invites the next storm to stay, and the next, and in doing so creates a machine that reshapes valleys, rearranges stones, and stores the breath of past summers as bubbles you could count and date like rings in wood. If you stood at the same marker on the neve year after year, your knees would remember. First, your boots sink to the ankle. Later seasons, the surface rises to meet your shins, then your thighs, even as your body has not moved. A pole you set upright becomes shorter without being cut, swallowed slowly by accumulation. The landscape records this rise with simple signs. A boulder grows a scarf of snow that never disappears. A ridge that once cast a shadow at noon is now level with the field it once overlooked. Below the equilibrium line, another book is being written, one where melt dominates, where last winter's drifts thin and vanish, where the glacier's tongue fractures into low towers and caves of blue glass, and the river at its mouth carries away the mountain grain by grain. The two ledgers, gain above, loss below, balance across the long average. When winters grow slightly stronger, or summers slightly kinder, the line creeps downhill. When the opposite is true, it climbs. None of this needs hurry to be certain. The conversion from crystal lace to flowing ice is just the planet organizing its water for slow travel. Each layer is a paragraph. Each year, a page. Each valley, a book you can read from the polish on a stone, the curve of a moraine, the milk-white braid of an outwashed stream. The snow that didn't melt has a destination. It will take ridges and walls and slopes into account. It will pick up stones and set them down miles away in places where grass will one day grow around them, and children will ask who left these giants here. The answer will be simple. Winter did, and it did so by keeping what it was given. Not all ice lies still. At a certain depth, weight becomes persuasion, and persuasion becomes motion. Snow that stayed through summers has thickened, compacted, and learned to act like stone that remembers water. The glacier is awake. From above it looks calm. Just a long tongue of white, flowing between dark valley walls. But if you watched carefully, year after year, the quiet body would shift like a living thing. Not in days, not in hours, but in seasons measured against the memory of rock. The glacier creeps forward, pressed by gravity, guided by slope, its entire mass moving as one, even if each part speaks with a different accent. High on the neve, movement begins in layers. Crystals deform, molecules slide past one another, and ice grains stretch like dough kneaded by an invisible hand. This is internal deformation, the slow rearrangement of crystal lattices under stress. It is imperceptible in a single glance, but over months, it draws the glacier forward by meters, over decades by kilometers. Patience is its only fuel. Where the bed beneath is rough or laced with warmth, water joins the story. A thin film melts at the base, from pressure alone. A reminder that even frozen water yields when pushed hard enough. The glacier glides on this film, pausing when friction holds, then slipping free again. It carries rocks along like passengers at its soul. Some ride quietly, smoothing the bedrock beneath into polished stone. Others grind furrows called striations, grooves aligned with the flow, silent arrows pointing the way the ice has gone. From time to time, a boulder freezes into the base and is carried forward. When the ice pulls it free from the valley wall, that act has a name: plucking. A cliff becomes notched, a ledge pulled apart. The rock fragments join the glacier's belly, chisels to carve deeper, rougher lines downstream. Every valley the ice touches remembers this work long after the glacier retreats. The glacier does not move evenly. The surface stretches more than the base, where friction drags against the bed. In steep valleys, this uneven pace fractures the ice. Cracks open, thin at first, then yawning, their depths filled with blue light so pure it feels like the color itself is liquid. These are crevasses, records of stress. They open across the ice tongue in patterns that reveal where the glacier bends, where it speeds, where it widens. Bridges arch over them, sometimes strong enough to bear a traveler, sometimes hollow, waiting to collapse with the next warm day. Farther down valley, the glacier encounters a cliff or steep drop. Its pace quickens. The ice tumbles like a frozen waterfall. Blocks break, tilt, and lean against each other in a chaos called an icefall. Here, the glacier shows its restless side. Towers of ice, seracs, rise precariously, glow in the sun, and crash without warning, their thunder echoing through the valley. The sound is both sudden and timeless, like the mountain clearing its throat. Yet even in its violence, the glacier remains slow. The crash of a serac is a moment, but the journey of the ice beneath your feet might take centuries. Snow that fell at the head of the glacier may not reach the tongue until your great-grandchildren's lives are stories told by their own fires. The glacier measures time differently, and it invites you to do the same. Where the tongue meets the valley floor, another landscape appears. The glacier drops what it has carried: rocks, sand, clay, all mixed into a gray till. It piles debris at its edges, forming moraines, low ridges that mark the limits of its reach. Some curve across the valley like fences. Others line its flanks like the walls of a long corridor. They remain even after the ice pulls back, quiet testaments to where it once lay. From the snout, meltwater spills into braided streams. Milky with powdered stone, they wander across the outwash plain, splitting and rejoining in restless loops. In the sunlight, each thread glimmers silver, and the whole fan of water seems alive, seeking paths, abandoning them, and seeking again. The sound is softer than a river's roar, more like a conversation whispered in many voices at once. Climb above, and the glacier's body reveals stripes, dark and light bands running down its length. These are flow lines, medial moraines, the stitched seams where tributary glaciers have joined. Like rivers of stone and ice, they carry the memory of their origins far downstream. From the air, the whole glacier looks like a slow-moving tapestry, woven from snow, dust, and time. Listen carefully. At night, the glacier speaks in small sounds. A crack as the temperature drops, a sigh where meltwater escapes, a faint grinding deep within. It is not silent, but its voice is subtle. You must be quiet yourself to hear it. Life, too, takes part in this frozen procession. Microbes live within cryoconite holes on the surface, thriving in dark pools warmed by sunlight. Algae bloom faintly red in the snow, tinting patches with a blush called watermelon snow. Birds circle overhead, nesting on cliffs warmed by sun and safe from predators. Even here, in this white dominion, the pulse of life persists. The glacier wakes not to conquer, but to continue. It is the world's slow memory, carrying the weight of winters, translating snowfall into movement, reshaping stone into valleys and lakes. It teaches patience in every step it takes, in every crack it opens, in every ridge it leaves behind. As evening returns, the ice field reflects the low sun like hammered silver. Shadows deepen in crevasses. The snout breathes mist into the cooling air. Stars appear, indifferent yet familiar, shining on ice that has seen their faces for 100,000 years. The glacier continues to move, though you cannot see it. It always moves. It is always awake now. Above the wide back of the glacier, the air has its own life. The cold surface chills the atmosphere that rests upon it. Dense air gathers in silence, then begins to slide downhill. These katabatic winds, born of ice itself, move steady and strong, carrying the glacier's breath into valleys below. They shape the snow into patterns the eye can read, patterns written in lines and ridges across the surface. Walk upon the neve, and you will see them. Snow is not smooth. It has been combed into low, hard-edged waves called sastrugi. They stand like frozen surf, ridges aligned with the direction of the wind. Some are sharp as knives. Others are rounded, softened by time. Their shapes whisper of prevailing currents, of how the air has flowed here for weeks or months. Each step upon them is a note in the glacier's music. Crunch, pause, crunch again. Even when no one listens, the pattern remains, repeating across miles of white. On certain days, the sky adorns itself with delicate jewelry. High above, crystals of ice drift in thin clouds. They turn and catch the sun, bending light into rings and arcs. Around the sun, a halo appears, pale but certain. Sometimes bright companions, the sun dogs, stand to either side, luminous and faithful. They look like echoes of the sun itself, keeping it company on its low path. Travelers long ago watched them as signs, but here they are, simply part of the quiet wonder of the frozen world. As the light lowers toward evening, another gift arrives. Far to the north, curtains of green and violet stir and lift. The aurora borealis flows like breath you can see, weaving across the stars. It bends, folds, and opens again in silence. A dance so large that the valley seems small beneath it. The glacier reflects the glow, its surface shimmering faintly, as though the sky and the ice are speaking to one another. No sound is needed. The color is its own voice. Wind sculpts more than the snow. It carries fine particles, dust from distant lands, soot from ancient fires, high into the air. They travel across oceans, unseen passengers on invisible currents, until they settle here upon the white. Each grain darkens the surface slightly, drinking more sunlight, melting a shallow well. From above, the glacier looks sprinkled with freckles, each one a history of someplace else. The world is connected in these quiet exchanges. Deserts lending their dust to ice, forests giving their ash, the globe breathing in long rhythms. At night, when the wind calms, another beauty appears. The sky is sharp and crowded with stars. Constellations blaze more brightly in the thin, frozen air. The Milky Way arches overhead, a pale river of light, mirrored faintly in the smooth expanses of snow. The silence of the land makes the stars seem closer, as though the universe has bent down to look upon its own reflection. Sometimes the wind sings. It threads through ice caves at the glacier's snout, whistling low and hollow. It drifts across crevasse fields, creating tones that rise and fall with its speed. On ridges, it hums through small hollows in the snow, turning the landscape into a vast instrument. If you close your eyes, you can hear the music of air and ice, a symphony composed slowly, endlessly, with no conductor but the elements themselves. Even storms here have a certain gentleness when seen from within the story of ages. Snow falls thick and fast, blotting out the horizon, reshaping the familiar landscape into a blank page. The wind piles drifts against the moraines, covers old tracks, smooths the scars of the day. When morning returns, the glacier looks renewed, its skin freshly painted, ready to begin again. Each storm is a reset, an erasure, and a promise. The sky and the ice are partners. The glacier gives the wind its cold breath. The wind gives the glacier its patterns. The sun bends through drifting crystals and writes circles of light. The ice reflects the aurora and doubles the beauty of the night. Together they turn a frozen valley into a theater of subtle wonders, a place where even stillness is full of motion. Stand there in your mind. Feel the steady wind brushing past. See the sundogs glowing on either side of the sun. Watch the aurora folding across the night sky. And listen. The glacier and the heavens are speaking in colors, lines, and whispers. They have no need for hurry, and neither do you. Where glacier meets ocean, two worlds hold hands. The land's slow weight pushes outward, and the sea accepts, rising to meet the ice. This is a boundary both fragile and immense. Ice shelves leaning into dark water, frozen plains stretching far from shore, seas wrapped in shifting skin. In winter, the ocean grows a film. At first it is delicate, crystals joining in lace-like patterns, spreading outward from the shore. They knit into a thin skin, dark beneath, bright above. Waves still move faintly, rolling under the new lid like sleepers turning in their beds. But the lid thickens. What was water yesterday is plain today. By midwinter, the plain is firm enough to carry the wind across without sound. The sea does not freeze all at once. Open windows remain where currents rise, with hidden warmth, or where winds sweep the ice aside. These gaps, called polynyas, are patches of breathing space in the frozen sheet. Through them, the ocean exhales mist into the air, thin white veils that drift and vanish. Seals surface here, resting briefly on the edges before slipping back under. Birds hover and dive, feeding where life rises from the dark. The polynya is an oasis in a desert of ice, a reminder that even in the coldest stretches, motion continues. Under pressure of tide, the frozen lid groans. Cracks stretch and close, lines etched across the surface like wrinkles on an old face. Stand upon such a crack, and you may hear the water below singing faintly, a long, low note like a bow drawn across a cello. At night, the sound echoes in the still air, a chorus beneath your feet. At the edge of the shelf, where ice leans over the open sea, drama unfolds. Massive slabs, taller than cathedrals, wider than towns, detach in silence and then fall, their thunder rolling across miles. The ocean leaps to receive them, sending waves that rise against cliffs of ice and break, scattering spray that freezes before it lands. The newborn berg turns and tilts, blue at its heart, white at its crown, a traveler just beginning a long voyage on the currents of the world. It will drift for months, perhaps years, melting slowly, feeding the sea with the memory of old winters. On calm days, the pack ice drifts like a vast puzzle. Sheets collide and buckle, pushing jagged ridges upward, slabs leaning against one another like toppled books. From the air, it looks like a mosaic. Plates of white and blue, edges outlined by shadows, some open lanes of water glinting black between them. This is the sea's shifting skin, restless yet ordered, broken yet whole. Below, life stirs unseen. Tiny plankton bloom in the cold, turning sunlight into food that rises through the chain of life. Fish patrol the under-ice world, silver bodies flashing in faint light. Whales pass beneath, their songs reverberating through water, a deep music the ice cannot silence. Even here, at the meeting of frozen plain and liquid abyss, the pulse of life beats steadily. The glacier itself sends more than ice into the ocean. Meltwater streams carve tunnels at its base and pour into the sea. Plumes of fresh, cold water mixing with salt. These plumes stir nutrients upward, feeding blooms that color the ocean and call to creatures far and near. The glacier breathes into the sea, and the sea answers with abundance. As seasons turn, the margin shifts. Summer thins the lid, widening cracks, softening ridges. The polinias spread into leads, lanes of open water that stretch for miles, mirrors to the sky. Icebergs wander farther, rolling and breaking, losing their edges to the sun. By late summer, waves reclaim much of the surface. But winter will return, and the plain will form again, as it always has, as it always will, while the cycle of ice endures. For those who live by rhythm rather than calendar, the meeting of ice and sea is timeless. The same shelf calves today as it did centuries ago. The same tide opens cracks and closes them, opens again and closes again. The same whales pass beneath, their voices braiding with the creaks and sighs above. It is not repetition, but continuity, a steady breath shared between worlds. Imagine yourself standing at the edge of such a place. Behind you, the glacier gleams, flowing down from highlands that never see warmth enough to bear their stone. Before you, the ocean stretches into haze, studded with bergs, floes, and glittering shards. The air is sharp, cold enough to taste. Each inhalation feels like glass turning to silk in your lungs. You are very small, but you are part of this vast conversation. Here, the earth is both frozen and fluid, both still and alive. Ice leans into water, water welcomes ice, and together they write a story of patience and change. The sea meets the ice not in battle, but in balance, a balance renewed with every season, every storm, every calving thunder, every drifting flow. The meeting place is a threshold. Stand upon it in your imagination, and you stand at the doorway of two worlds, Above, the sky waits with stars. Beneath, the sea waits with life. Between them lies the ice, solid, luminous, patient, keeping the memory of winters long past and shaping the promise of seasons still to come. Even in the coldest reaches, life does not disappear. It simply changes its rhythm. It folds itself inward, slows its pulse, and waits with patience deeper than any winter. The landscape may look silent, but silence is not emptiness. It is a form of rest. Beneath the snow, seeds are tucked away. They fell months ago, shaken loose from dry stalks by wind, carried on the fur of animals, or dropped by birds whose journeys are long forgotten. Now they lie hidden in the soil, cloaked in a blanket of white. They do not rot, and they do not sprout. They breathe faintly, conserving their strength until warmth returns. In each tiny seed is a script written for the future. Leaves, stems, blossoms, fruits, all waiting in a shell no wider than a fingernail. Insects, too, find their way through the cold. Some burrow deep into bark or soil, filling their bodies with natural antifreeze, proteins and sugars that stop ice from forming in their veins. Others curl in cocoons, suspended halfway between what they were and what they will become. Time passes differently for them. What feels like months to us is a single long night to their quiet hearts. When spring unfolds, they will wake, stretch delicate wings, and continue their story as if no pause had ever taken place. Beneath the snow crust, an entire world exists. It is called the sub-Nivean zone, a hidden space between soil and snowpack, a corridor of tunnels and chambers. Here, mice and voles scurry unseen, nibbling on roots and seeds stored away. The snow above insulates, keeping the temperature steady even when the air outside falls far below freezing. The roof is soft enough for predators to break through, yet strong enough to hide scents and shadows. In this quiet labyrinth, life endures, warm and secret. Larger animals adjust in their own ways. The Arctic fox curls into the snow, tail wrapped around nose and paws, body making a den of itself. Its fur thickens and pales until it vanishes against the drift. Snowy owls perch on low hummocks, eyes half closed against the glare, listening for faint sounds beneath the crust. Reindeer and musk oxen scrape with hooves to uncover lichens, patient in their search. The rhythm of their lives slows, but it does not stop. Even in the ice itself, life persists. Tiny microbes live in thin veins, where liquid water trickles between crystals. They feed slowly on dust, on minerals, on what little light filters through. To us, it seems impossible, but to them, it is ordinary. They have learned to live within cold, to carry on their work in silence, to turn even the barest resources into sustenance. Some will remain dormant for decades, then awaken when meltwater comes. Others will continue, steady and unseen. leaving faint traces of color within the white. The sea holds its own winter guests. Beneath the pack ice, plankton bloom when sunlight returns, painting the underworld green. Fish glide between pillars of ice, using the shelter of ridges as safe corridors. Seals surface in polynyas, warm breath rising as mist in the frozen air. Whales pass beneath, untroubled by the season, their songs threading through water and echoing against the ice. Even here, beneath a ceiling of frozen silence, life sings. There are places where life rests in stillness so complete it seems eternal. In frozen lakes, frogs bury themselves in mud and let ice fill their bodies, hearts slowing almost to nothing, waiting for thaw. In dens, bears curl with cubs, drawing warmth from one another, living off fat stored in seasons of plenty. In tree hollows, owls guard the dark, feathers puffed, eyes half closed, seeing all and nothing at once. All across the frozen planet, creatures great and small choose endurance over escape. Winter is not a void. It is an interval. It is the pause between chapters, the silence between breaths, the rest that makes music possible. Every living thing understands this pause, and each in its own way accepts it. Seeds hold spring, insects hold flight, animals hold memory of paths, trails, and places they will return to when warmth calls. Even ice holds life, waiting for a signal to stir. The stillness teaches us something as well. That survival is not always loud or fierce. Sometimes it is quiet, steady, unseen. Sometimes it is the courage to do nothing, to wait, to trust that the cycle will turn. The snow hides life, but it also protects it, keeping the world safe in its folded hands until the sun once again leans stronger upon the earth. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine lying beneath that snow, in a den, in a tunnel, in a seed's small chamber. The air is cool, the world above is hushed, but you are safe, held by the blanket of winter. Time slows, worries fade, and only the soft certainty of survival remains. When the warmth returns, you will rise again. Life has not vanished. It has only learned to rest. And rest is enough. At the edges of the glacier, signs begin to appear. They are not loud, not dramatic, but quiet traces that speak of what the ice is doing and what it will become. The valley keeps these marks the way a diary keeps a page. A careful eye can see them, though no one is in a hurry to read. Along the flanks, low ridges rise where there should be none. They are made not by rivers or wind, but by the glacier itself. Stones, pebbles, and clay have been carried along in the frozen body, pressed at the base and pushed out at the sides. When the ice pauses, it sets these burdens down, and the ridges remain. They are called moraines. Though the name is not as important as the shape, they are the handwriting of ice, signatures written in stone, marking the farthest reach of its breath. Centuries from now, grass will cover them, but the lines will still remain, whispers of where the glacier once lay. At the glacier's snout, meltwater escapes in restless threads. The streams that emerge are pale and cloudy, filled with powder ground from mountains. This powder is called glacial flour, the dust of stone milled by the weight of ice. It turns rivers a soft, milky blue, and under the sun they shine like opal, braiding and splitting across the outwash plain. They do not settle into a single channel, but wander like thoughts, trying one path, then another again. In their restless weaving, they carry the mountains out to sea, grain by grain, a slow gift from the high places to the wide ocean. Sometimes the glacier carries a much larger gift. A boulder torn from a cliff may travel miles in silence, riding hidden in the belly of the ice. When the glacier finally lays it down, the stone rests in a place where nothing else around it matches. A block of granite sits alone in a meadow of sandstone. A lonely boulder crowns a hill, far from the mountains that bore it. These are erratics, strangers left behind by the ice. They are storytellers without words, pointing back to lands they once belonged to. Reminders that the reach of ice is longer than memory. In hollows scoured deep by the glacier's weight, meltwater gathers. At first, they are small pools, mirrors held in the palm of the land. Over years, they deepen into lakes, cold and clear, ringed by the ridges of moraines like the rim of a bowl. Some are so still that clouds can lie down in them without disturbance. They are the eyes of the landscape, looking upward, keeping the color of the sky within. Later, they will hold reeds, fish, and birdsong. For now, they are silent, waiting, as though the world is teaching itself how to reflect. The winds carry their own omens as well. Dust rises from dry valleys far away and travels across oceans. Invisible passengers on invisible currents. When it settles on the glacier, each grain darkens the surface slightly, drinking more sunlight, carving tiny dimples that sink into the white. These freckles of dust make small wells, called cryoconite holes. Within them, even here, life stirs. Algae grow, microbes gather, tiny worlds bloom in pockets of melt. What looks like emptiness is never truly empty. The glacier carries deserts upon its back, and the deserts bring with them the seeds of life. Stand at the edge, and all these signs are visible. The ridges of stone, the milk-blue rivers, the lonely boulders, the still lakes, the freckles of dust. Each is a quiet omen, a mark of something larger than itself. They tell us that this is not just a winter, not just a season. This is a beginning. The ice is not passing through. It is settling in. It is shaping the land for an age, and the land is already learning to hold its memory. The omens are gentle, but they are certain. The glacier writes in stone, in water, in dust. The earth listens, and so can you. Let your thoughts move as slowly as these rivers. Let them wander without hurry, splitting and rejoining, always flowing, never lost. The signs are clear. The ice age has begun. Imagine a continent wrapped in white. From the far north, a vast sheet of ice spreads southward, covering hills, forests, and plains beneath a weight measured in miles. This is North America in the time of ice. the reign of the Laurentide ice sheet. It lies over the land like a second sky, silent, immense, unbroken. Beneath it, mountains vanish. Only their tallest peaks pierce the surface, small islands of rock adrift in a sea of frozen light. Valleys are filled, ridges are smoothed, rivers are trapped beneath the load. The land does not resist, it simply endures, holding the weight as centuries pass above. At its edge, the glacier becomes restless. Here the ice cracks, surges, and calves into cliffs of frozen blue. Meltwater bursts forth in sudden floods, carving new paths across the plains. In spring, torrents rush from tunnels beneath the sheet, carrying silt and stones, spreading wide across the land, before vanishing into low basins where lakes begin to form. Farther south, where the ice halts, the boundary is sharp. A wall of white rises against forests and grasslands. Cold air spills from its face, chilling everything in its shadow. Animals wander close and turn away, driven by instinct to keep to safer ground. The line shifts slowly over centuries, advancing and retreating, but always the presence of ice is near, pressing its cold breath across the land. Within the sheet, time is measured differently. Snowfall above takes centuries to work its way downward, compressing layer upon layer into clear ice. Each band holds a story: dust from deserts, ash from far-off volcanoes, bubbles of air from summers long forgotten. Together they form a library miles thick, a record of climate and sky, kept safe in silence. When the sun leans low, the ice glows softly. Shadows stretch across its surface, long and blue, ridges etched in delicate light. The horizon disappears into brightness, sky and glacier blending, until it is hard to see where one ends and the other begins. The air is still, as though sound itself has chosen to rest. In this frozen dominion, the continent waits. Forests withdraw to southern refuges, grasslands shift, rivers are diverted. But the ice holds steady, slow and immense, shaping valleys, carving basins, leaving behind marks that will outlast the age itself. The land is being rewritten, though no hand guides the pen. Only ice, only time, only patience. And so North America lies beneath its white crown, enduring quietly, waiting for the centuries to turn. Across the ocean, another sheet of ice spreads. It stretches across Europe and into Asia, a pale expanse that buries rivers and forest beneath its weight. This is the Fennoscandian ice sheet, a mantle of silence drawn over the northern lands. From the British Isles to the wide shoulders of Russia, the world lies under a long frozen breath. In Scandinavia, mountains vanish beneath the burden. Only the highest ridges remain, their peaks black against the glow of snow. Valleys that once carried streams now cradle blue glaciers, each one feeding into the great mass that covers the land. The ice moves outward, flowing slowly toward every edge, pressing against the coasts, grinding against cliffs, shaping fjords that will one day hold the sea. Over Britain, the sheet spreads like a hand. Scotland lies hidden beneath white. Ireland wears a coat of frost. England feels the edge of the ice press into its soil before retreating again. For centuries, the landscape is a frontier between green and white, shifting slowly as the balance of seasons tilts. Farther east, the ice meets the wide plains of Russia. Here the sheet stretches farther than the eye could see, a horizon without detail. A desert not of sand, but of frozen light. Winds sweep across it, carrying fine snow into ridges that point the way of the air. The silence is immense, broken only by the creak of ice beneath its own weight. At the southern margin, forests bend away. Pines retreat, birches yield, grasslands spread where trees once stood. Animals follow the line of cold, moving southward, seeking shelter in valleys where warmth still lingers. The land becomes a patchwork, tundra and steppe beneath a pale sky, forests huddled in the distance, and above all, the presence of ice, patient and vast. The sheet leaves its memory behind as it shifts. Moraines line the plains like scars, ridges of stone marking where the glacier paused. Erratic boulders lie scattered, dropped by ice long vanished, strangers in a foreign soil. When the sheet pulls back, rivers will return, filling the basins it carved, creating lakes that mirror the sky. But for now, everything lies under white, hidden and waiting. From Britain to Siberia, the continent rests beneath its cold crown. The ice does not hurry. It presses forward, retreats, and presses again, as centuries fold into one another. And all the while, the land changes quietly, shaped not by storms or fire, but by the steady hand of frozen time. Across the wide reaches of Siberia, the land wears a different face. Here the ice does not blanket every horizon. Instead, vast plains lie open beneath a pale sky, swept by winds that carry cold from the north. This is the steppe, a boundless grassland that stretches farther than sight, a sea of frost-touched earth beneath the arc of the heavens. The ground is hard, locked in permafrost that never yields. In winter, it is a sheet of frozen soil, silent and brittle. In summer, the surface softens only slightly, thawing just enough for thin grasses and hardy flowers to appear. Their roots shallow, their colors fleeting. Beneath them, the earth remains sealed, a cold heart hidden beneath a brief and fragile skin. Winds sweep across these plains without pause. They lift dust and fine silt from the surface, carrying it for miles, even for continents. This dust settles elsewhere as loess, forming fertile soils far from its origin. The steppe gives of itself without complaint, its gift carried by air into other lands. Herds wander here, for the grass still grows, even in such a climate. Woolly mammoths stride across the open ground, tusks curved like crescents of ivory. Bison cluster in restless groups, moving steadily in search of forage. Wild horses graze with heads low, manes lifted by the constant wind. The cold does not stop them. It shapes them, teaching endurance, teaching patience. Predators follow the herds. Wolves pad silently across the plain, their tracks filling quickly with drifting snow. Cats prowl at the margins, eyes fixed, muscles coiled, ready for the chance of a kill. The steppe is wide, but life finds its balance here. Hunger and survival moving together in the endless expanse. At night, the sky deepens, a vault of stars clearer than anywhere else on Earth. With no trees to break the horizon, the heavens feel immense, pressing down upon the plain. The aurora sometimes visits, shimmering green curtains rising and falling above the silence. The animals stand still beneath it, watching without fear, as though the light were only another season passing overhead. The rivers that cross this land run cold and slow, their banks bound by frost. In spring, when meltwater arrives, they swell and braid across the plain, cutting channels that shift from year to year. In winter they lock in silence, white ribbons across a darker ground. Everywhere the rhythm is the same. Freeze, thaw, freeze again. The Siberian steppe is not buried by ice like other lands. It lies at the edge, in the shadow of the great sheet, a partner to it rather than a prisoner. Here the earth is exposed, but the cold rules just as firmly. It is a place of wind, of dust, of endless space. It is a place that endures, quietly, beneath the long breath of winter. Farther south, where the great ice sheets release their hold, the land changes again. Here lies the tundra, a wide plain of low plants and frozen soil. It is neither bare like the ice, nor rich like the forest. It is something in between, a place of patience and survival, where only the hardiest life can thrive. The ground is bound by permafrost, frozen solid beneath a thin layer that softens for a short summer. When the snow retreats for a few weeks, small plants appear. Mosses spread in soft carpets, lichens cling to stone. Dwarf shrubs put forth tiny leaves, no higher than an ankle. Their roots do not dig deep. They cannot. Instead, they stay close to the surface, living where the brief warmth touches, taking what they can before the cold returns. For a little while, flowers bloom. They are small, fragile, yet bright, dots of color against the pale earth. Yellows, purples, and whites lift toward the sun, opening only for days before fading again. It is enough. Each blossom produces seed, and the seed will wait through the long winter until another brief chance arrives. The air is alive with birds during this short season. Migrants travel thousands of miles to nest here, drawn by the abundance of insects that rise from thawing pools. Geese, swans, and cranes gather on the tundra, filling the silence with calls. When their young are strong enough, they will leave again, fleeing the cold that never stays away for long. Beyond the tundra lies the taiga, the forest of the north. Here, trees return. Endless stands of spruce, pine, and larch stretching across the horizon. The taiga is vast, dark, and quiet, a sea of needles whispering in the wind. Snow weighs heavily on their branches, bending them into arcs, sculpting shapes that look like figures at rest. In the stillness, the forest endures, season after season. Animals find their homes here too. Caribou graze on lichens in winter and wander back to tundra plains in summer. Moose move through wet lowlands, feeding on willows and aquatic plants. Wolves and lynx stalk quietly between trees, leaving only faint trails in the snow. Even in the coldest days, owls and foxes hunt, their keen senses tuned to the smallest motion. The tundra and taiga are lands of edge and transition. They are not buried beneath the sheets of ice, but they live in its shadow, shaped by its cold breath. Each year they wake briefly to life, then return to silence. They hold the memory of green even as the white waits close by. Here, endurance is written into every plant and every animal. Nothing grows quickly, nothing hurries. Everything accepts the rhythm. Brief light, long night, and the slow return of cold. It is a rhythm as old as the age itself, steady and sure. And so the tundra and the taiga stretch across the northern world, a vast belt of survival between forest and ice, between warmth and silence, a borderland where life does not vanish, but bends, adapts, and endures. Out over the northern oceans, the cold writes a different story. Here the sea itself becomes part of the ice. Winter after winter, the surface freezes, spreading outward from the coasts until the horizon is sealed beneath a white plain. This is the frozen sea, a restless skin that forms, cracks, and drifts with the wind. At first, the ice is thin, a lace of crystals gathering on dark water. Waves move beneath it, rippling gently, as though breathing under a blanket. With each night, the skin thickens. Soon it becomes firm, carrying the weight of snow, carrying the wind without sound. By midwinter, it is strong enough to stretch for hundreds of miles, broken only by cracks where pressure or tide has worked its will. Openings remain in this frozen sheet. They are windows of black water called polonias, kept clear by rising currents or steady winds. Through them, the ocean exhales into the frozen air, mist rising like smoke on cold mornings. Seals surface here to breathe, their sleek forms shining against the white rim. Birds gather above, diving and calling, taking their chance at open water. The polinia is a reminder that even when the sea wears a lid, life finds a way to breathe. The ice is not still. Winds drive the flows, pressing them together, tearing them apart. Where they collide, Slabs tilt upward into ridges, leaning against one another like toppled books. Where they drift apart, leads of open water appear, long dark lanes that stretch for miles. From above, the surface looks like a shattered mosaic, pieces shifting endlessly, breaking, joining, and breaking again. When the tide rises, the pack groans, cracks open with low, echoing booms. At the shelf's edge, great slabs break free in silence, and then thunder into the sea, rolling, tilting, showing the deep blue of their hearts. Each new iceberg begins a long voyage, drifting for months or years, melting slowly, carrying the memory of old winters into distant waters. Beneath the frozen lid, the sea is alive. Plankton bloom when the light returns, painting the under-ice world green. Fish swim among the pillars and ridges, silver bodies flashing in the faint glow. Whales pass silently below, their songs rising and echoing against the frozen ceiling. Even here, where the surface seems still and lifeless, the ocean carries its steady pulse. At night, the frozen sea reflects the sky. The aurora dances across the horizon, green light bending and flowing, mirrored in patches of open water. Stars glint on ridges of ice, so sharp and close they seem to rest upon the surface. The silence is immense, broken only by the slow creak of pressure and the whisper of snow brushing across the plain. The frozen sea is not permanent. Each year it melts, drifts, and reforms. It is a cycle, a rhythm, a balance between water and air, warmth and cold. But in the time of the Ice Age, it stretches farther, lasts longer, and holds the world in its grip. It is another face of the great cold, a reminder that even the oceans are not free from winter's hand. And so the sea lies bound, its surface frozen into shifting fields, its depths still alive with hidden movement. Above and below, silence and song meet, sharing the same wide stage beneath the northern sky. High in the mountains, the cold leaves its sharpest marks. Here the ice does not lie flat across plains, but pours into valleys and climbs the shoulders of ridges. It cuts and chisels, shaping stone with patience greater than any sculptor's hand. The peaks that rise above the glaciers stand like islands, but even they are changed, carved by the slow weight pressing at their sides. A valley that once carried a stream begins to widen under the glacier's touch. What was once a narrow V, cut by running water, becomes a broad U, smooth and deep. The walls grow steep, the floor flattens, and the river of ice moves steadily forward, carrying with it rocks and gravel, grinding the walls as it goes. The shape it leaves behind is unmistakable, a signature of the ice that will remain long after the glacier is gone. At the head of a glacier, the mountain itself is bitten into. Hollows form where snow gathers and presses, carving out basins called cirques. They are deep, round amphitheaters of stone, their walls polished and sheer. their floors often filled with small blue lakes once the ice retreats. To stand in one is to stand in the bowl of time, surrounded by cliffs that tell of centuries of frozen work. Between cirques, ridges sharpen into narrow knives of stone called arêtes. They rise like spines, thin and perilous, their sides falling away into valleys carved on either flank. Where three cirques meet, a peak sharpens further, forming a horn, jagged, pointed, unmistakable. Mountains once broad and rounded are turned to blades by the glacier's hand, their outlines etched against the sky with new clarity. Rocks caught at the glacier's base grind against the bedrock, polishing it to a shine. They carve long striations, grooves etched into the stone, all pointing in the direction of the flow. Even when the ice has melted, the marks remain, straight and certain, guiding the eye to where the glacier once moved. Sometimes, whole blocks are pulled free, plucked from the walls and carried away, leaving behind cliffs that look as though a giant hand has torn them apart. Meltwater plays its part as well. Streams tunnel through the glacier, carrying silt and gravel, carving channels that shift with each season. When the water escapes, it lays down eskers, long ridges of sand and stone, winding like rivers across the land. These ridges remain long after the glacier has vanished, strange pathways of earth that rise above the plain, telling of rivers that once flowed beneath the ice. The mountains become a gallery of forms, cirques, arêtes, horns, U-shaped valleys, striations, polished rock, moraines, and eskers. Each is a sculpture, patient and exact. Taken together, they tell a single story. The ice was here, and it changed everything it touched. At sunset, the peaks glow in soft light, their sharpened ridges outlined in gold. The glaciers below shine blue in the shadows, their surfaces ridged and broken, crevassed and scarred. The air is thin, the silence immense. In the stillness, you can almost hear the mountain itself, remembering the hand of the ice, holding its shape as proof of what time can do. And so the highlands stand, their faces remade by cold, their outlines sharper, their valleys deeper. They are monuments not only to stone, but to ice, witnesses to the age when glaciers ruled the heights. Beneath the heavy sheets of ice, another world waits in silence. It is a world hidden from the sky, sealed away for centuries, yet alive in its own secret ways. Where the glacier presses hardest against the land, thin films of meltwater slip between ice and stone. They carve channels and hollows, invisible rivers flowing in darkness. Sometimes they gather into vast lakes, locked beneath the frozen ceiling, untouched by sun or wind. In these subglacial lakes, the water is ancient. It may have been sealed away for tens of thousands of years, warmed only by the faint heat of the earth below. The ice above insulates it, keeping it liquid even while the world above is frozen solid. Strange sediments gather here, fine silt and clay brought in by trickling streams, building layers that no eye has seen. In the depths, tiny forms of life endure, microbes that survive without light, feeding slowly on minerals, patient as the ice itself. Channels snake beneath the glacier, changing with the seasons. Some remain as steady tunnels, carrying meltwater to the snout, where it bursts free, as braided rivers. Others collapse and reform, rerouted by pressure and flow. When they drain suddenly, whole hidden lakes vanish in hours, sending floods roaring from beneath the ice, reshaping valleys downstream. These floods leave behind broad plains of gravel, ridges of sand, and scattered stones, landscapes born from hidden tempests. The base of the glacier is a place of grinding. Rocks frozen into the ice scrape across the bedrock, plowing deep grooves, polishing surfaces to a smooth shine. When the ice moves on, these striations and polished faces remain, maps carved into stone. They tell the direction of flow, the weight of centuries, the story of a valley's long burial. Even in darkness, beauty persists. Where crevasses open above, shafts of blue light sometimes reach downward, piercing into the hidden world for a few moments each day. They shine like pillars in a vast cathedral, revealing walls of ice that glow as if lit from within. In those moments, the underworld of the glacier becomes a place of wonder, silent and immense, a secret chamber beneath the skin of the earth. The pressure here is great, but the ice is not immovable. It creeps and shifts, shaping the land beneath as surely as it shapes the mountains above. Ridges rise, basins deepen, rocks are plucked and carried away. When the glacier finally retreats, the valleys it leaves will hold chains of lakes, winding ridges, and wide plains, all born in this hidden world where no sunlight entered. The land beneath the ice is rarely seen, yet it is always changing. It is a place of flowing water, grinding stone and quiet life. It is the earth's memory, written in darkness, kept safe beneath the heavy weight of frozen time. And when at last the ice lifts and the sky returns, the traces of this hidden world will lie open for all to see. Circles of lakes, smooth valleys, striated rock, the carved signatures of glaciers that ruled in silence for ages untold. The story of ice is not only about stillness, it is also about rhythm, a long breathing of the planet itself. Glaciers advance, then retreat. Seas fall, then rise. Forests withdraw, then return. It is as though the earth itself inhales and exhales across the ages, each cycle lasting tens of thousands of years. When the world inhales, the cold deepens. Snow falls, but summer is too weak to melt it. Layer upon layer builds until glaciers swell and push outward, their weight covering whole continents. Seas grow shallow as water is locked away in frozen sheets. Animals move southward. Plants retreat to warmer zones. And the earth wears its crown of white. When the world exhales, the ice draws back. Winters grow shorter, summers linger longer. The sheets thin, rivers of meltwater roar, and valleys emerge once again from their frozen prisons. Forests creep northward, tundra turns to meadow, and seas rise to reclaim the land. It is not a sudden change, but a slow breath, measured not in years or lifetimes, but in ages. This rhythm is guided by the movements of the planet itself. The Earth does not spin or orbit in perfect stillness. Its tilt shifts, its orbit wobbles, its path stretches and contracts. These slow changes alter how sunlight falls across the globe, sometimes gentle, sometimes strong, sometimes spread wide across the seasons, sometimes gathered more sharply. They are small adjustments, yet over thousands of years they guide the great pulse of ice. Dust travels with these breaths. In colder times, winds blow stronger, carrying fine particles across oceans and continents. They settle on glaciers, on plains, on seas, leaving faint traces that tell of drier, stormier ages. When warmth returns, forests spread again, holding the soil in place, softening the winds, dimming the storms. The earth responds as one body, shifting with its own quiet cycles. Even within an age of cold, the breath is uneven. Sometimes the ice advances quickly, swallowing valleys in centuries. Sometimes it pauses, halts for a while, then pulls back before pushing forward again. These are the shorter breaths within the longer ones, stadials and interstadials, smaller pulses of cold and warmth folded into the greater rhythm of the ice age. Every grain of pollen caught in a lake, every layer of dust in a glacier, every line carved into stone records this breath. Taken together, they form a song without words, a long and patient melody, the voice of a planet moving through time. It is a reminder that change is not always a storm, not always a sudden event. Sometimes it is simply breathing, slow, steady, eternal. And as the earth breathes, life bends with it. Forests bow, plains shift, animals wander, oceans rise and fall. Everything listens to the rhythm. Everything learns its pace. It is the planet's own music, older than memory, older than any story, older even than the ice itself. The breath of the earth is guided by small motions, almost invisible in the span of a human life. Yet over thousands of years, these motions steer the balance between ice and warmth. They are the planet's gentle gears, turning slowly, steadily, with patience beyond imagination. The earth does not circle the sun in a perfect path. Its orbit stretches and relaxes, sometimes more round, sometimes more oval. When the orbit is more oval, summers in one hemisphere grow hotter, winters colder, and the contrast sharpens. When it is more round, the seasons smooth out, gentler and more even. This slow change takes tens of thousands of years to complete, yet it shapes the strength of summer, and with it, The fate of the ice. The Earth also tilts as it spins. Today, it leans a little more than 23 degrees. But this angle shifts over time, rocking back and forth by a few degrees like a cradle swaying. When the tilt grows steeper, summers are brighter, winters darker. The poles receive more contrast, and ice feels the difference. When the tilt eases, the seasons soften, and ice holds its ground more firmly. There is another motion too, slower still. As the Earth spins, its axis traces a circle, like the wobble of a top. This slow precession shifts the timing of the seasons, deciding whether a hemisphere tilts toward the sun during its closest approach or turns away instead. It is a long rhythm, measured in thousands of years. Yet its timing decides whether summers burn bright enough to melt glaciers or leave them to grow. Together, these cycles, eccentricity, tilt, and precession, form a quiet orchestra. Their music is not heard in days or years, but in ages. They do not force the Earth to change, but they nudge it gently, again and again, until ice advances or retreats. They are the planet's way of keeping time, the hidden metronome behind the breath of glaciers. The ice listens to these gears. It thickens when summers weaken, spreads when warmth fades, retreats when the sun leans closer or longer. Forests, deserts, seas, and animals all follow the same patient rhythm. The cycles turn, the breath continues, and the Earth writes its story in layers of ice, stone, and memory. To us, these motions are invisible, but the land remembers them. Every striation in bedrock, every ridge of moraine, every bubble of air caught deep in the ice is a record of their work. It is proof that even the smallest shifts, given time, can shape the face of the world. And so the gentle gears of the planet turn, unseen yet certain, guiding the rise and fall of ice, guiding the rhythm of the Earth's breath. Ice not only listens to the sun, it also answers. Its voice is made of light, reflected into the sky. Fresh snow is bright, so bright it gives most of the sunlight back to the heavens. This brightness is called albedo, a quiet power that shapes the balance of warmth and cold. When ice spreads, the Earth grows paler. More light is turned away, more heat is lost back into space. The air cools further, the seas chill, and the ice thickens again. It is a circle that feeds itself, a feedback written in white. The more snow that falls, the more the world keeps its cold. But when the ice retreats, the opposite happens. Dark ocean surfaces drink the sun instead of returning it. Bare ground absorbs warmth. Forests deepen the shadows, and the earth grows darker. Heat lingers, melting spreads, and the ice pulls back farther still. It is another circle, this one of warmth, building upon itself with the same quiet certainty. Clouds join in, veils that drift above the ice. Sometimes they protect, shading the surface from the sun, slowing the melt, Other times they hold warmth close, trapping heat that would otherwise escape into the night. They are part of the balance, shifting from shield to blanket, subtle partners in the rhythm of ice and fire. In the high latitudes, where the sun is low, these effects matter most. A slight change in brightness, a shift in reflection, can tip the scales over centuries. A brighter earth invites more cold. A darker earth invites more warmth. The ice and the sky speak back and forth in this way, adjusting the climate like two hands on the same loom, weaving the seasons together. Seen from above, it is simple. A field of snow gleams, and the air grows cooler. A dark sea opens, and warmth gathers. Again and again, the balance tilts, always returning to the slow rhythm of cycles, always guided by the gentle gears of the planet. This is how the ice and the sky converse. Not with words, not with sudden storms, but with light and shade, with reflection and absorption. It is a dialogue of brightness, patient and eternal, shaping the breath of the earth one season at a time. The wind carries its own story into the age of ice. Across the open plains, dust lifts easily, rising into the air and traveling for hundreds, even thousands of miles. It is fine like powder, light enough to float across oceans, yet heavy enough to settle where the winds grow calm. Layer upon layer it falls, covering the land in blankets of pale soil called loess. This dust is more than a trace of dryness. When it lands upon the ocean, it feeds the smallest of life. Grains rich in iron sink into the waves, stirring blooms of plankton that drift just beneath the surface. These tiny creatures draw carbon from the air as they grow, carrying it into the deep when they die. In this quiet way, the dust shapes the breath of the planet, helping the world lean toward cold. The oceans themselves are not still. Currents move like slow rivers, weaving between continents, carrying heat from one hemisphere to another. During the age of ice, these currents shift, altered by the weight of glaciers, the height of seas, and the saltiness of the water. A change in flow can mean warmth for one coast, chill for another. The deep sea keeps its own memory, storing heat for centuries, releasing it only when the surface invites. Together, wind and water nudge the world gently but persistently. Dust darkens the ice where it settles, making it melt faster. Yet dust upon the sea can spark life that cools the air. Currents can warm a coast and let ice retreat, or chill it and call glaciers back. These are not storms or sudden disasters, but small adjustments, repeated across thousands of years, each one adding to the breath of the age. The land remembers this as layers of loess stacked high, soft yellow cliffs built grain by grain from winds long past. The sea remembers it as slow pulses of carbon, drawn down into its depths and held for centuries. And the ice remembers it in thin streaks of dust buried within, each layer a quiet fingerprint of a storm far away. The age of ice is not guided only by the great tilt of the earth or the brightness of snow. It is also shaped by these tiny travelers. Grains of dust, drops of salt, the drift of currents. Small things, subtle things, carrying the power to bend the world when given enough time. As the ice spreads, the forests pull back. Great stands of pine, oak, and beech retreat southward, pressed by cold winds and advancing glaciers. What once were green valleys become tundra, open plains of grasses, moss, and lichen. The line between forest and ice moves slowly, yet steadily, and life has no choice but to follow. Animals wander with the shifting edge. Deer and elk drift south into the cover of trees, where food is easier to find. Mammoths and bison move across the widening grasslands, feeding on the hardy plants that endure the frost. Predators follow them: wolves, lions, and bears, each adapting to the new rhythm of the land. The world is in motion, not with storms, but with migrations that stretch across centuries. Birds, too, change their paths. Some abandon their northern nesting grounds, turning to warmer refuges where rivers remain unfrozen. Others linger at the edges, nesting in places where meltwater pools and insects rise for a short season. Each species listens to the land, adjusting routes and cycles as the forests withdraw. For plants, the shift is slower, but just as certain. Seeds that once fell in shaded soil now fall into open tundra. Some fail, but others adapt. Shrubs growing lower, roots clinging closer to the surface, flowers blooming in shorter bursts of color. What was once forest floor becomes meadow, dotted with blossoms that last only weeks, yet return faithfully each summer. Farther south, forests thicken. Here, trees crowd together, pushed into smaller refuges where the climate still favors them. Species mingle that once lived apart, drawn close by necessity. Over centuries, these refuges become strongholds, pockets of green that preserve the memory of northern woods, until the ice allows them to return. The retreat is not a sudden vanishing. It is a slow reshaping, a long exhale. Step by step, the green gives way to white and brown, the canopy to open sky. And in that openness, new life finds a foothold, while old life waits in hidden valleys for its time to return. The forests are not gone forever. They are simply patient, keeping their seeds, holding their memory, retreating for now, but waiting, as the earth has always done, for the balance to shift again. Even within the long reign of ice, the cold is not constant. It comes in pulses, surges forward, then eases back. For centuries the glaciers advance, spreading across valleys and plains. Then, for a time, they pause, holding their ground. Sometimes they even retreat, only to press forward again when the breath of the planet tilts once more toward cold. These pauses and pulses are smaller rhythms inside the greater cycle. They are like the beating of a heart, within the long, slow breath of the earth. During a pause, summers grow slightly stronger, enough to melt the edges of the ice. Rivers swell, plants creep back into valleys, animals wander farther north. But the respite does not last. The next pulse of cold arrives, and the glaciers reclaim what they had briefly surrendered. Evidence of these rhythms lies everywhere. Moraines are stacked in lines, one behind the other, each marking a stand of the glacier. Lake sediments show layers of warmth and cold, alternating bands of color recording centuries of change. Even the ice itself carries the pattern. Thin lines of dust and trapped air whispering of brief thaws between deeper freezes. To those who lived in these times, the changes would have been subtle. A valley that had opened for grazing might be swallowed again within the span of a few generations. A river that once ran clear might be choked with melt one century, then freed the next. For animals, for people, the world was never fixed, but always shifting, always asking them to move, to adapt, to endure. The smaller pulses are part of the larger design. They remind us that even within an age of deep cold, nothing is truly still. The ice is always breathing, always listening to the sun, the tilt, the wind, the sea. It moves forward and back, not as a march, but as a tide, slow, immense, and patient. And so the Ice Age is not one long note of silence, but a melody of pauses and pulses, rises and falls, each one woven into the larger song of the Earth. Deep within the ice, the planet keeps its memories. Each snowfall that lingers becomes a page, pressed beneath the weight of centuries, sealed into clear layers. What looks like simple ice is in truth a library, a record of skies long vanished. Tiny bubbles lie trapped within those layers, pockets of air caught at the moment they fell. Breathe them in, and you would be breathing the breath of ancient summers, the exhale of forests, the smoke of distant fires. Scientists call them samples, but they are more than that. They are whispers from a time before memory, voices preserved in silence. Dust, too, is carried into the ice, grains lifted by winds and settled upon the white. Each layer holds a trace of deserts far away, of storms that crossed continents, of volcanoes that cast their ash into the stratosphere. The dust marks moments of dryness, of fire, of upheaval, all preserved in fine lines of brown and gray within the blue. Deeper still, the ice itself changes. Bands of clear and cloudy crystals reflect the warmth and cold of long cycles. Years of abundance lie thick and bright. Years of scarcity, thin and faint. The record continues downward for miles, stretching back through hundreds of thousands of winters. A story too long for any human memory, yet written with absolute patience. The rocks tell their own version. Valleys carved wide and smooth, cliffs torn where glaciers plucked stones from their sides, ridges of moraine curving across plains. All are words in the stone's language. striations etched by grinding ice, point in the direction of flow, straight as compass lines. Erratic boulders lie where no local mountain could have made them, reminders of journeys across a frozen sea. Together, the ice and the stone are memory keepers. They do not forget, even when the ice retreats, even when grass grows over the scars. Their stories remain, quiet but legible to those who listen. And the memory is not only of cold, it is of change itself, advance and retreat, storm and calm, summer and winter, written in bubbles and dust, in ridges and grooves. The earth remembers all of it, holding the record until we are ready to read. In the stillness of a glacier, in the polish of a stone, in the quiet depths of an ice core, the long memory of the planet waits. It does not fade. It does not hurry. It endures, patient as time itself. Across the frozen world, where forests had pulled back and ice pressed from the north, a vast grassland spread. It stretched from Europe across Siberia and all the way into North America. A single immense steppe. This was the Mammoth Steppe, a land of endless sky and endless grass, the greatest pasture the earth has ever known. The ground was bound by permafrost, but the surface thawed each summer just enough to grow. Hardy grasses and herbs rooted shallow, covering the plains in a tough green carpet. They did not need deep soil or long warmth, only light and space. And here, space was abundant, stretching farther than the eye could see. Herds roamed in numbers beyond counting. Woolly mammoths moved slowly across the plains, tusks curved like moons, heavy fur brushing against the cold wind. Bison clustered in great masses, heads bowed to the grass, their hooves thundering softly in the soil. Wild horses grazed in long lines, their dark manes lifted by the breeze. Everywhere the land was alive with movement, a restless migration across an open world. Among them lived other giants, woolly rhinoceroses, heavy and horned, pushed through snow to reach the plants below. Musk oxen gathered in circles, their thick coats forming a wall against predators. Saiga antelope with curved noses trotted lightly across the frost, swift and watchful. Each creature was shaped for this place, hardened for cold, patient for scarcity, enduring with quiet strength. Predators followed in silence. Cave lions stalked the herds, their paws wide and soft against the snow. Wolves hunted in groups, shadows moving across the steppe, their eyes fixed on the weak and the young. Hyenas and bears roamed as well, scavenging or striking when the chance arose. The land was harsh, but it was rich, and every life found its place within its balance. Seasons passed with rhythm. In spring, grasses grew thick, fed by meltwater from the retreating snow. In summer, flowers opened briefly, coloring the plain with purples and yellows before vanishing again. In autumn, the winds grew sharper, and the herds drifted southward, to escape the worst of the storms. In winter, the land was bare, snow covering much of the forage, but the animals endured, scraping the frozen ground, surviving on what little remained. Above, the sky was vast and unbroken. At night, it was filled with stars, brighter than in any forest, clear above the open plain. Sometimes the aurora danced here too, green curtains flowing across the horizon, lighting the frozen grassland in a glow no fire could match. The herds grazed beneath it, calm, unbothered, their lives woven into the light as naturally as into the grass itself. The mammoth steppe was not a place of abundance in the way of warm forests or fertile valleys. It was a place of balance where survival came not from plenty, but from endurance. Yet it held more life than anywhere else in its time, sustained by grasses that never tired, by soil that gave just enough, by cycles that repeated for ages. It was a kingdom without walls, ruled not by a single creature, but by the rhythm of cold and the patience of grass. And in that kingdom, giants walked, and the earth carried their footprints across continents. Among the herds of the steppe, one creature stood as a symbol of the age. The woolly mammoth, tall as a house, cloaked in thick fur, tusks sweeping in long, graceful curves. They moved slowly, with patience in every step, their feet wide and cushioned for the snow. Their trunks curled and reached, pulling grasses, tugging at shrubs, lifting snow aside to find what lay beneath. Their coats were dense, a double layer of warmth against the winds. Long guard hairs hung like streamers, and beneath them, a softer underwool held heat close to the skin. Fat lay thick beneath the hide, a final shield against the cold. Every part of them was shaped for survival in a world of frost. They were not alone in their kind. The great herds of the steppe were never alone. Where prey gathered, predators followed, and the Ice Age plains were no different. Every shadow on the horizon, every shape that moved against the wind, carried a story of hunger and patience. Wolves were among the most enduring hunters. Their paws were wide, their coats thick, their bodies lean and tireless. They traveled in groups, following the mammoths, the bison, the horses. Together they could bring down prey far larger than themselves, working as one, each move guided by instinct older than memory. Their howls rolled across the empty plains, long, mournful notes that echoed through the night. It was not only a call to each other, but a claim, a reminder that the land was theirs to roam. Lions prowled here too, larger than those we know today. Cave lions they were called, though they did not live only in caves. They followed the herds, strong and silent, their muscles flowing beneath golden coats. They moved with confidence, their eyes fixed on the weakest in the herd, their patience endless. When the moment came, they leapt, swift and heavy, their power breaking the stillness of the steppe. Bears wandered the cold world as well, Some were short-faced giants, taller and heavier than any bear alive now. They searched for food across the plains, feeding on berries in the brief summers, but never hesitating to scavenge from a kill or chase weaker prey. Others, smaller and darker, sought shelter in forests, where cover was easier to find, and winters could be spent in dens of safety. Even hyenas roamed in these frozen lands. They were not the laughing creatures of today's savannas, but powerful hunters, able to crush bone and endure the cold. They stalked in packs, clever and bold, their voices carrying strangely in the still night air. Everywhere, predator and prey were bound together. The herds fed the hunters, and the hunters shaped the herds, keeping the balance that had always existed. It was not cruelty, only survival, part of the same rhythm that guided grass, ice, and wind. At night, the plains carried many sounds. The heavy breathing of mammoths, the shuffle of hooves in the snow, the soft pad of wolves moving unseen, the low growl of lions waiting in the dark. The world was wide and cold, but it was not empty. It was filled with life, each creature playing its part in the patient song of the age. And so the predators endured, as the herds endured, both sides woven into the fabric of the frozen world. Together they made the steppe more than just a plain of grass and snow. They made it a living stage, filled with movement, tension, and balance, all beneath the pale breath of the Ice Age sky. Not all creatures of the Ice Age were giants. Beneath the heavy steps of mammoths, beneath the watchful eyes of lions, smaller lives moved quietly. They were hares, foxes, owls, and countless others. Creatures often overlooked, yet no less important in the story of survival. Hares darted across the snow, their coats pale in winter, blending so perfectly that even shadows struggled to catch them. In summer their fur turned brown, matching the earth and grass. They lived on twigs and bark, on buds and herbs, always watchful, always ready to vanish into the white. Their speed was their strength, but their stillness was just as powerful, a silence that made them invisible in a land of hunters. The Arctic fox, smaller than its red cousin, curled against the snow with fur thick as down. Its coat shifted with the seasons too, white in winter, gray-brown in summer. It lived on scraps, on lemmings, on the leftovers of wolves and bears. Its nose was sharp, its patience endless. When food was scarce, it could wander for miles, following the scent of seals along frozen coasts or birds nesting on cliffs. It was never the strongest, but it was clever, and cleverness was enough. Owls watched from the edges of the tundra, silent shadows with eyes that saw in the dark. The snowy owl, white as the ground it ruled, glided low over the plains, its wings beating without sound. It hunted hares and rodents, swooping in silence, its strike as sudden as lightning. At night, when the aurora flickered across the sky, The owl's pale feathers glowed faintly in the green light, like a ghost passing across the steppe. Beneath the snow, smaller lives kept to their hidden world. Mice and voles tunneled in the subnivean space, feeding on roots and seeds stored away. They were prey to all, yet their numbers never failed. Every hole in the snow was a doorway to their secret kingdom. Every track on the surface, a story of survival written briefly, before the wind erased it. Even insects endured. Beetles, flies, and midges found niches in the brief summers, their lives short but constant. In frozen pools, larvae waited for warmth, ready to rise when the sun allowed. They were food for birds, for fish, for anything quick enough to catch them. Small, fleeting, but essential, they carried the pulse of the steppe in ways unseen. These creatures did not tower like mammoths or roar like lions, yet they were threads that held the fabric together. Without hares, foxes would starve. Without voles, owls would vanish. Without insects, birds would have no young to raise. The frozen world was not only a stage for giants, but also a tapestry of countless tiny lives, each one linked to the next. When the wind swept across the plain, it carried with it not only the breath of mammoths, but the rustle of hares, the whisper of foxes, the silent wing beat of owls. Together they made the steppe alive, rich with movement and sound, a world where even the smallest creature mattered. And so they endured, quiet survivors of the cold, overlooked perhaps, but never absent. Their patience, their numbers, their cleverness gave balance to the world of giants. In their own way, they too were rulers of the Ice Age, keeping life steady beneath the shadow of the glaciers. The cold did not belong only to the land. Out in the oceans, life carried on beneath the frozen seas, where ice floes drifted and shelves groaned against the tide. Here, too, the Ice Age shaped hunters and survivors, creatures who lived where water and ice touched. Seals surfaced in black pools of open water, their whiskered faces breaking the silence. They hauled themselves onto the ice to rest, their sleek bodies shining in the pale light. Some lived close to the coasts, feeding on fish in shallow bays. Others wandered farther, diving deep, holding their breath for long minutes as they searched for prey in the cold, dark sea. On the ice, they gathered in quiet groups, their young born on the frozen plain, soft and helpless beneath the low sun. Polar bears prowled the edges of this frozen world, great hunters shaped by snow and sea. They walked the pack ice, waiting by seal holes with endless patience. When the moment came, they struck with sudden power, dragging their prey from the water. Their white coats hid them against the ice, but their dark eyes gleamed with purpose. They were rulers here, moving across the drifting floes as if they were extensions of the land itself. Whales passed beneath the frozen lid, their songs carrying through the dark water. Bowhead whales thrived in the ice, their bodies massive, their heads strong enough to break through frozen surfaces to breathe. They fed on clouds of plankton, sweeping through the cold sea with mouths wide, filtering life from the water in endless rhythm. Other whales migrated with the seasons, moving toward warmer seas to give birth, then returning north to feed in the rich summer waters. Their voices echoed in the deep, long notes that traveled for miles, songs that stitched the ocean together in sound. Walruses gathered in herds along the edges, tusks long, bodies heavy, their cries echoing across the flows. They dived for clams and shellfish, stirring the sea floor with their whiskered snouts, then hauled themselves back to shore, crowding together for warmth and safety. Their young stayed close, nudged along by mothers, protected within the circle of the herd. Birds joined this world as well. Gulls and auks wheeled above the ice, diving for fish in the open water. In summer, cliffs were crowded with nesting colonies, thousands of voices rising in unison, a storm of wings above the sea. When the season ended, they flew south, leaving the rocks empty until the next cycle returned. Even beneath the ice itself, life thrived. Plankton bloomed in the faint light, painting the underworld with green. Fish darted between ridges, silver sparks in the dim glow. The sea was not empty. It was as rich as the steppe, filled with its own balance, its own rhythm, its own hunters and prey. Above it all, the aurora sometimes shone, reflected in the dark leads of water. The frozen sea gleamed beneath the shifting light, a vast stage where bears waited, seals surfaced, whales passed below, and birds circled high. It was a world within a world, the ocean's share of the Ice Age, alive and moving even in the shadow of the ice. For thousands of years, the balance of the Ice Age held steady. Giants walked the steppe. Predators followed the herds. Oceans sang with whales, and small creatures endured in silence. But balance is fragile. Even the strongest can be undone when the world begins to change. The great mammoths, so perfectly shaped for the cold, depended on the endless grasslands. As climates shifted, as summers grew longer and winters less severe, the steppe began to shrink. Forests crept northward, pushing grasses aside, and the wide pastures grew smaller each century. The herds that once moved in countless numbers dwindled, their food vanishing beneath spreading trees. The woolly rhinoceros faced the same fate. Built for frost and open plains, it could not thrive in shadowed forests. It needed the wind, the grass, the open horizon. As those horizons closed, the rhinos disappeared one by one, until only bones remained to mark their passing. The giant cave lions and short-faced bears, once lords of the hunt, suffered too. Their prey grew scarce, and without the great herds to follow, their strength was wasted. Predators cannot live without abundance, and abundance was fading. They lingered for a time, but the world no longer suited them. The balance tipped, and they slipped into memory. Smaller creatures endured, Foxes and hares, owls and voles, they could adapt, shift, and survive on less. But giants cannot live on scraps. They need wide spaces, steady forage, unbroken cycles. When those cycles faltered, the giants were the first to feel the loss. The change was not swift. It unfolded slowly, over centuries, as grass gave way to trees, as summers stretched, as winters eased. To the animals themselves, it was not a sudden ending, but a thinning of the world, a quiet diminishing. Yet the outcome was the same. The age of giants was already beginning to fade. The earth was not cruel. It was only changing, as it always had. But in that change, the lives that had flourished for millennia began to falter. The mammoths, the rhinos, the lions, the bears, all carried within them the signs of a world passing into a new rhythm, one that no longer belonged to them. It was the beginning of extinction, foretold not by catastrophe, but by the slow reshaping of land and climate. The signs were written in grass, in trees, in the warming of air, in the retreat of the ice. The giants had ruled the steppe, but even they could not rule forever. And so the great herds grew smaller, the predators fewer, the plains quieter. The story of the Ice Age was entering its next chapter, one where change would come not only from climate, but from a new force upon the land: humans. The tools of the Ice Age people were simple in shape, yet profound in meaning. A stone flake, sharp and precise, could cut meat, scrape hides, carve wood, or shape another tool. A spear tipped with flint could bring down prey far larger than its maker. In skilled hands, even bone and ivory became blades, needles, and ornaments. Each object was more than just material. It was memory, skill, and tradition carried forward. They learned to shape fire as carefully as they shaped stone. A spark caught in dry moss, coaxed with breath, grew into flame. With wood and fat, it became a steady fire, a source of warmth in the endless cold. By firelight, food was cooked, skins softened, stories told. The glow turned dark caves into homes, turning fear into comfort, turning night into a place of gathering. Art flowed from these fires as well. On walls of limestone caves, the people painted the animals they knew best: horses, bison, mammoths, lions, drawn with ochre, charcoal, and careful strokes. By torchlight, the figures seemed to move, alive in the shadows. Perhaps they were prayers for the hunt, or memories of the world outside, or simply the joy of making life appear on stone. Whatever their purpose, they were voices reaching across time, still whispering to us tens of thousands of years later. They carved as well as painted. Ivory from mammoth tusks was shaped into small figurines, animals, spirits, even human forms. Bone was etched with lines, patterns, and marks that may have been calendars, or simply records of what mattered most. Even the smallest tools were decorated, proof that beauty was never separate from survival. Their clothing, too, was a form of art and skill. Hides were sewn with bone needles and sinew thread, layered against the cold. Fur lined the inner coats, while leather shielded the outer. Boots, mittens, and hoods turned the body into a fortress of warmth. Without this knowledge, no one could have survived the cold nights of the Ice Age steppe. They were storytellers. Around the fire, voices carried tales of hunts, of ancestors, of spirits that walked the land. Children listened with wide eyes, learning not only what was true, but what was believed. The stories gave shape to fear, meaning to struggle, and comfort in the vast silence of the frozen world. Culture was survival, but it was also more. It was memory shared, skills passed on, beauty made from bone and stone. It was laughter in the cold, song in the night, handprints pressed against cave walls like signatures of existence. Through these things, humans were not only living in the Ice Age, they were making it their own. The tools, the fire, the art, all were signs of a mind that reached beyond the present moment. They were proof that survival alone was not enough. Humans sought connection, story, and meaning, even as the wind howled and the ice pressed closer. And in that search, they began to change the balance of the world. One fire, one tool, one painting at a time. The people of the Ice Age lived beside giants, and sometimes they hunted them. The mammoth, towering and immense, was both a gift and a trial. To face such a creature was to risk everything, yet the reward could sustain an entire band through the deepest cold. The hunt began with patience. People watched the herds from afar, studying their movements, learning the paths they favored, the water they sought, the places they lingered. They looked for the weak, the old, the young, the ones who could be separated without bringing the herd's fury upon them. When the time came, they moved as one, their spears ready, their voices silent, their hearts steady. Some hunts were careful drives. The herd pushed slowly toward marshes or narrow valleys where escape was difficult. Other hunts relied on traps, pits dug deep, camouflaged with branches and snow. A mammoth that stumbled into such a place could not climb free. It was a dangerous task, but necessity outweighed fear. When the spears struck, the world thundered. The mammoth trumpeted, the ground shook, snow rose in clouds beneath its hooves. But the hunters did not stop. They pressed closer, striking again and again, until the giant fell. Its last breath rose into the cold air, a heavy sigh that seemed to linger in the silence. The kill was never wasted. Meat was carved and shared, feeding the group for weeks. Fat was stored and burned in lamps, a light against the endless night. Bones became frames for shelters, strong enough to hold hides against the wind. Tusks were carved into tools, ornaments, and figures, carrying the memory of the animal into every detail of daily life. Around the fire after such a hunt, there would be stories. The mammoth was more than food. It was spirit, power, mystery. Paintings on cave walls often showed them. Tusks curved like moons, bodies immense and steady. To take a mammoth was to touch something greater than survival. It was to step into the rhythm of the earth itself. Yet the hunters were not only takers. They lived with respect, aware of the danger and the gift. They did not seek to destroy herds, but to live alongside them, taking only what was needed. The bond between people and mammoth was complex, part reverence, part dependence, part necessity. Over time, this bond shaped human culture. The mammoth's presence filled their stories, their art, their shelters, their tools. It was woven into their lives as deeply as fire and stone. Without the mammoth, the survival of many bands would have been far more fragile. The hunt was always a risk, but it was also a reminder of what humans could do together. With patience, courage, and unity, They could face the largest creature of the age. They could take its strength and turn it into their own. And so, in the frozen plains of the Ice Age, the path of people and mammoth was shared, bound together in survival and story. Two giants of different kinds, one of body, one of mind, walk in the same land, shaping each other's destiny. Life in the Ice Age was not only about the hunt. It was also about building places of rest, circles of safety, where families could gather against the long night. People shaped their shelters from what the land offered. Skins stretched over wooden poles. Bones of mammoths set upright as frames. Caves turned into homes with firelight at their heart. Inside, warmth held back the cold, and voices filled the space with comfort. A mammoth bone hut was a marvel of patience. Huge tusks arched into ribs, skulls and long bones formed the walls, and hides were draped across the frame. The floor was lined with grass and furs, a soft layer against the frozen earth. Here, families slept close, sharing warmth, listening to the wind howl outside, while firelight flickered against ivory walls. The bones of giants became a shelter for the fragile, turning death into protection, memory into life. In caves, the walls themselves became companions. By torchlight, shapes were drawn, horses racing across stone, bison standing heavy and strong, mammoths with sweeping tusks, lions stalking the plain. Red ochre, black charcoal, and yellow clay gave color to the visions. The paintings seemed alive in the shifting glow, as if the animals had entered the cave to join the people in their firelit world. Handprints appeared too, pressed in pigment against the stone. Some were small, the hands of children, others large and weathered. Each was a mark of presence, a declaration across time. We were here, we lived, we remembered. The walls carried not only images, but echoes of voices, songs and stories told in the deep dark, where sound lingered and imagination soared. Carvings and figurines added to this silent chorus. Ivory was shaped into animals, into spirits, into forms of humans themselves. Bone and antler bore lines and patterns, some perhaps counting days or moons, others simply marking beauty. These objects were held, treasured, passed from hand to hand, binding memory into things that could endure beyond a single lifetime. Clothing was art as much as survival. Furs sewn with care became coats, boots, mittens, and hoods. Some were decorated with beads or carved pendants, symbols of identity and belonging. Even in the harshest cold, people sought beauty, carrying it with them as they carried tools and fire. And always there were stories. Around the flames, elders spoke of hunts, of ancestors, of spirits who guided or tested them. Children listened, wide-eyed, learning both the world as it was and the world as it was imagined. Stories gave shape to memory, wove meaning into hardship, and turned survival into something greater, a shared understanding of who they were. The shelters, the art, the clothing, the stories, all were threads of culture. They tied people together, bound families into bands, bands into communities. They gave resilience not only to the body, but to the spirit. Even in the coldest winters, when the wind screamed and food was scarce, people carried warmth within themselves through memory and meaning. This was how humans made the Ice Age their home. Not by brute strength, but by shaping the world into a place of belonging. One fire, one song, one carving at a time. The people of the Ice Age did not stay in one place. They followed the herds, they followed the seasons, and slowly, across centuries, they followed the land itself. Step by step, camp by camp, they spread outward into new worlds. At times the way was open. Grassy plains stretched far ahead. Rivers bent gently across the land, and game was plentiful. Families moved with ease, carrying only what they needed, trusting the land to provide the rest. Children walked beside parents, elders guided with memory, and together they pressed forward into horizons that seemed endless. At other times, the way was hard. Glaciers blocked the valleys, forcing detours across high ridges. Storms swept the plains, burying trails in snow. Yet people endured, moving carefully, finding shelter, waiting for weather to ease before continuing. No barrier was permanent, only another pause in a journey that never truly ended. In the far north, a bridge of land once joined continents. Where the sea lies now, dry earth stretched between Siberia and Alaska. Herds crossed it, following the grasses, and people followed the herds, stepping into a new land, unaware they had entered a continent no one had walked before. It was not a single march, but a slow drift. Families moving over generations, never knowing they were reshaping the map of human life. Southward, too, people spread, entering valleys once held by glaciers, forests that had returned after centuries of cold. Each new land asked for adaptation. Different tools, different shelters, different foods. But humans carried with them the same skills: stone, fire, art, and story. These were enough to meet whatever the New World offered. They crossed rivers in simple rafts, followed coastlines rich with shellfish, climbed mountains in search of game. At night, they camped beneath unfamiliar stars. Yet the fire and the circle of voices were always the same. Everywhere they went, they made the land home, not only by living on it, but by leaving behind carvings, paintings, and stories that marked their presence. The migrations were not hurried. They unfolded like the slow pace of glaciers, measured not in years, but in centuries. Each generation walked a little farther, built its camps in places new, and left behind children who would walk farther still. By this rhythm, the world was opened. The people of the Ice Age were wanderers, but they were also connectors. They carried ideas as well as tools, sharing ways of hunting, of shaping stone, of painting animals. What one group learned in a valley, another carried to the coast, and another carried still farther. Knowledge traveled as surely as footsteps, weaving the world together even as the people spread apart. In this way, humanity became a creature of the earth entire, not bound to one plain or one forest, but able to move into any place the ice allowed. The steppe, the tundra, the taiga, the coasts, all became human lands, linked by firelight and story. And so, through patience and persistence, the migrations continued, across rivers, across mountains, across the bridge of land that once joined continents. It was a quiet journey, but one that shaped the destiny of every age to come. In the frozen silence of the Ice Age, survival alone was never enough. People sought meaning in the world around them. The animals they hunted, the stars above, the storms that swept across the plains. Every hunt, every fire, every birth and death felt tied to something larger, something unseen but deeply felt. The mammoth was not only food, it was a spirit, a presence that demanded respect. Painted on cave walls, carved into ivory, whispered about in stories. It was more than flesh. It was power, memory, and perhaps even a guide. To face it in the hunt was to step into a relationship as old as time, a balance between taking and honoring. The sun and the moon carried meaning too. The rising light, the dark of night, the shifting phases, they were cycles that echoed the seasons, the migrations, the breath of the earth itself. Stars marked directions, but they also stirred wonder. The aurora shimmered like curtains of spirit fire, moving across the night sky, as though the heavens themselves were alive. Fire was not only warmth, but sacred. Its sparks, born from stone, seem magical. Light from darkness, heat from nothing. Around it people gathered, told stories, sang songs. The fire was family, protection, and perhaps even a bridge to unseen forces. Burials reveal this sense of belief. Bodies were laid with care, surrounded by tools, beads, and carvings, as though they would need these things in another life. Some were covered in red ochre, the color of blood, of life itself. The gesture was tender, symbolic, more than necessity. It was love and hope woven into ritual, a sign that people saw existence as more than the moment. Figurines carved from ivory and stone spoke of spirits as well. Some were animals, lifelike and strong. Others were human, their shapes stylized, their meanings uncertain but powerful. They may have been symbols of fertility, guardians of the hunt, or reminders of ancestors. Whatever their purpose, they reveal a mind reaching beyond survival towards story and belief. The Ice Age was harsh, but within its cold, people found ways to weave wonder. They made the unseen visible, gave voice to silence, and filled their lives with symbols that carried them through fear and hunger. Belief was strength, as real as fire and food. It gave courage in the hunt, patience in the cold, and comfort in the face of death. And so, even in a world of ice, humans lived not only with their bodies, but with their spirits. They were creatures of meaning, shaping their frozen world into something sacred, filling the silence with story, memory, and hope. The Ice Age did not last forever. Slowly, quietly, the balance began to change. The summers grew longer, the winters less severe. Snow that once lingered year after year began to melt away. The great sheets of ice, so steady for so many centuries, started to retreat. At first it was subtle. A glacier that had once pressed into a valley pulled back a little. A river that had been locked beneath ice for ages began to run free. Plants returned, small at first. Grasses, moss, a scattering of flowers. But each summer carried more warmth, and each winter carried less power. The ice responded. It groaned, cracked, and shifted, unable to hold its old dominion. Enormous floods burst from melting margins, carving new paths across the land, leaving behind plains of gravel and wide, winding channels. Mountains once buried beneath frozen weight emerged, their faces polished and scarred by the ice's long grip. Lakes appeared where glaciers had dug basins. Some were clear and deep, others shallow and restless, spreading wider each season. They reflected the sky, blue upon blue, and filled the silence with the calls of new birds returning to the north. Forests crept back. Birch and pine, spruce and oak spreading slowly from their southern refuges. Each decade they reached farther, covering valleys that had lain bare for millennia. Where once the wind had howled across tundra, now leaves whispered and shadows pooled beneath branches. For the animals, the change was both gift and trial. The herds followed the grass into new lands, but the open steppe that had sustained them began to vanish. Bison and horses shifted with the meadows, but the mammoths, so perfectly shaped for endless grasslands, began to falter. The world that had once been theirs was shrinking, and with it, their numbers. Humans watched the change with cautious eyes. New rivers offered fish. New forests offered wood and game. New lands opened for travel. Yet the old ways, the hunts of giants across wide plains, began to fade. The people adapted, as they always had, but the age around them was shifting faster than memory could hold. The retreat of the ice was not swift, not sudden, but it was certain. Each century it lost ground. Each century the earth grew greener, wetter, and warmer. The age of cold was ending, and the age of change had begun. As the world grew warmer, the giants who had ruled the steppe began to struggle. The mammoth, the woolly rhinoceros, the great herds that had walked beneath the aurora, each had been shaped for the cold. But the cold was leaving, and with it, the land that had sustained them. The mammoths followed the retreating grasses northward. Where forests spread, they did not linger. Their heavy bodies, their wide tusks, their thick coats, all were suited to open plains, not to shadowed woodlands. Each century, their herds grew smaller. pressed into narrower spaces at the edges of the shrinking steppe. They endured, but the balance was turning against them. The woolly rhinoceros faced the same fate. It had thrived on the wide grasslands, sweeping snow aside with its horn to uncover food. But as the plains gave way to trees, it found less to eat, less space to roam. Like the mammoth, it retreated farther and farther north, holding on as long as it could. Other giants faded too. The cave lion, once the ruler of the hunt, lost its prey as the great herds thinned. The short-faced bear, powerful but dependent on abundance, found less to scavenge and hunt. Even the mighty bison, though survivors, shrank in form, their Ice Age cousins larger than those of today. The age of giants was ending, not in fire or sudden disaster, but in a slow dwindling as the land itself changed beneath their feet. On islands, a few mammoths found refuge. Cut off from the mainland, they grew smaller, adapted to their limited world. For thousands of years after their cousins vanished, they lingered in isolation, shadows of a greater age, walking shorelines long after the glaciers had retreated. But even they could not endure forever. The warmth reached them too, and at last their footsteps faded into silence. Humans had their part in this story. With fire, with tools, with cooperation, they were skilled hunters. They had faced the mammoth and prevailed, had turned its bones into homes, its tusks into art. As the herds grew fewer, the hunts weighed heavier. Each kill mattered more. Each loss harder for the animals to recover. The giants were pressed by both climate and people, caught between shrinking land and rising hunters. Extinction was not a single moment. It was a long twilight, a thinning of herds, a quiet vanishing from valley after valley. For centuries, mammoths still walked in the far north, lions still stalked the steppe, rhinos still grazed in the cold. But one by one, their ranges collapsed, their numbers dwindled, and their presence became only memory. The Ice Age had given them a world, and when the Ice Age ended, that world dissolved. The mammoths, the rhinos, the cave lions, they belonged to the age of cold. When warmth returned, their time was over. The land remembered them, though. Bones lay buried in permafrost, tusks surfaced in riverbanks, paintings on cave walls carried their shapes across millennia. Even now, we know their story not only through science, but through art and memory left by the people who once lived beside them. The giants melted away as the ice did, slowly, quietly, inevitably. And with their passing, the age of cold gave way to the age of people. As the ice sheets melted, the world was reshaped by water. For centuries, the glaciers had held vast oceans of it, locked in frozen silence. Now, as they retreated, that water returned to the sea, and the balance of the earth began to shift. Rivers swelled with meltwater, rushing stronger than ever before. They carved new valleys, shifted their channels, and poured into basins where none had been before. Some rivers broke free in sudden floods, walls of water racing across the land, sweeping stones and soil before them. The marks of these floods remain even now. Broad channels, scattered boulders, cliffs torn open in a single season of fury. Lakes grew where glaciers had once lain. Some were immense, stretching farther than the eye could see. Lake Agassiz in North America was one such giant, a body of water larger than all the Great Lakes combined. It shimmered beneath the sky, fed by countless streams of meltwater, held in place only by fragile ice and ridges of stone. When its barriers broke, floods poured into the oceans, raising seas across the globe. The coastlines changed as well. Where once land bridges had connected continents, the rising seas drowned them. The path between Siberia and Alaska vanished beneath waves, cutting off the bridge that people and animals had walked for millennia. Lowlands across the world were swallowed, valleys became bays, and islands were born where once there had been plains. For those who lived through it, the change was slow but unrelenting. Each generation saw rivers a little higher, shores a little closer, the sea creeping farther inland. Villages near coasts shifted upward. Camps followed the land that remained. To them, the world was not collapsing, but breathing, reshaping, moving as it always had. Forests spread into new spaces, nourished by the fresh water. Birds and fish followed the rivers into places once locked in ice. The landscape was alive with transformation, the earth no longer bound in stillness but in motion. Yet the floods left scars. Fields of stone, vast plains of gravel, cliffs cut deep. They were reminders of how powerful water could be when released from its frozen prison. The ice had ruled with silence, but its melting ruled with motion, rewriting the shape of continents. The seas rose higher, and with them, the balance of the planet shifted again. The coastlines we know today were drawn in those centuries, when water returned to the oceans and the face of the earth was made new. The great thaw was not only the end of an age of cold, it was the beginning of a new age, one where warmth and water reshaped the land and opened paths for the world to come. As the ice retreated and the floods reshaped the land, green returned to places that had been silent for ages. Forests spread slowly at first, small groves of birch and pine creeping into valleys where glaciers had withdrawn. Then, with each century, the trees pressed farther, until the tundra gave way to woodland, and the plains echoed once again with the murmur of leaves. In Europe, oak and beech followed the birch and pine, covering hills and river valleys with dense canopies. Birdsong filled the mornings, and streams ran beneath branches that had not known shade for tens of thousands of years. Where mammoths had once wandered through endless grass, now deer and wild boar rooted and grazed in forests of green. In North America, spruce and fir moved northward, spreading across the plains left bare by ice. Bison shifted with them, finding food among new meadows that grew between the trees. Moose thrived in the wetlands, their heavy forms browsing willows and aquatic plants. The land, once silent beneath the ice, was alive with the rustle of wings and the cries of animals that had been pushed south for generations. Grasslands returned too, though in different places. Where the soil was rich and the air still cool, wide prairies opened. They rolled across the land in waves of green, alive with wildflowers in spring and buzzing with insects in summer. Horses, antelope, and bison grazed the new meadows, though the herds were smaller than the vast ones that had thundered across the Ice Age steppe. The change was not uniform. Some regions warmed quickly, forests rushing into open land. Others held on to their tundra for centuries longer, keeping mosses, lichens, and hardy shrubs close to the ground. But everywhere, the direction was the same. The green was returning, the earth was softening, the silence of the ice giving way to the song of life. For people, the new forests offered both gifts and challenges. Wood for shelters and fires, new animals to hunt, berries and nuts to gather. But dense trees also made hunting harder, visibility shorter, dangers closer. The open steppe had been a wide canvas. The forest was a labyrinth. Humans adapted as they always had, shaping new tools, new strategies, new ways of living with the land. The return of green also changed the sky. Moist air rose from forests and wetlands. Clouds formed, rains fell more often. Where once the winds had been dry and sharp, now the air was softer, filled with the smell of pine and soil. Seasons grew gentler, winters still cold, but no longer endless, summers warm enough to bring abundance. The world was becoming familiar, closer to the earth we know today. Glaciers remained in the far north, and high mountains, but their reach no longer defined the continents. Forests and grasslands had reclaimed the land, and with them came a new rhythm of life. The Ice Age was not gone in an instant, but its reign was broken. The silence of frozen plains had given way to the whisper of leaves, the song of birds, the flowing of rivers unbound. A new age had begun, one of warmth, of growth, of change. As the world grew warmer and the forests spread, humans found themselves in a new kind of land. The great herds of mammoths were fading, the wide steppe was shrinking. But in its place came new possibilities. The warming world was not emptier, it was simply different, and people learned to live within it. Rivers became highways. No longer frozen for most of the year, they ran steady and wide, carrying fish, birds, and life along their banks. People built their camps near them, where water was always near, where reeds and trees offered shelter, where the land was rich in food. Boats of wood and hide began to appear, simple at first, but enough to carry families across currents and lakes, opening paths into places once unreachable. Forests gave wood not only for fire, but for tools. Spears and bows became sharper, lighter, easier to carry. Arrows tipped with flint could strike at deer or boar from a distance. Traps and snares caught smaller animals that now thrived in the undergrowth. The forest was not an obstacle, but a resource, once people learned its language. Food was gathered in new ways too. Berries ripened in summer. Nuts fell in autumn. Roots and mushrooms could be dug from the earth. What had been a narrow diet in the age of mammoths became broader, more varied. People no longer depended on giants alone, but on the many smaller gifts the land now gave. With warmth came abundance. Populations grew, bands of families multiplied, and communities grew larger. Instead of wandering endlessly, some people began to stay longer in certain places, returning each season to the same rivers, the same valleys, the same groves. It was the beginning of settlement, not yet permanent, but more rooted than before. Stories changed with the land as well. Where once the mammoth had dominated art and memory, now deer, birds, and fish began to appear. Carvings and paintings shifted, reflecting the new world humans inhabited. The spirits of the forest replaced the spirits of the steppe, and the rhythm of the seasons replaced the rhythm of the ice. The warming world gave humans not only survival, but growth. They spread into every continent, filling the spaces the glaciers had abandoned. From high mountains to wide coasts, from rivers to plains, they learned to live with every landscape, shaping each into a home. The giants were fading, but humans were rising. Their tools grew sharper, their fires brighter, their voices stronger. The world was no longer only endured, it was shaped, adapted, and increasingly defined by human hands. The Ice Age was ending, but a new age was beginning. One that belonged not to mammoths or glaciers, but to people. Even as the ice withdrew, it never truly left. Its memory was written everywhere across the land, etched into stone, carved into valleys, scattered across plains. The world we know today still carries the marks of glaciers that melted thousands of years ago. Mountains remember the touch of ice. Their valleys, once narrow and sharp, were widened into broad U-shapes by the grinding of glaciers. Cirques remain at their heads, deep hollows where ice once gathered, now filled with clear blue lakes. Arêtes rise like knife edges between them, and sharp peaks, horns, stand as monuments to the chiseling power of frozen time. Ridges of stone, called moraines, lie across the land like the lines of an ancient script. Each ridge marks a pause, a place where the glacier stood still for a while before retreating again. To walk along one is to walk the old edge of the ice, a boundary between the frozen past and the warming present. Plains of gravel stretch where floods once poured, wide fans of stone left behind by torrents of meltwater. Rivers still follow some of those paths, but others lie dry, ghost channels carved in a single season of release. They are scars of sudden power, remind us that even ice, when it yields, does so with force. Boulders sit in fields where no mountain lies nearby. These erratics were carried for miles, frozen into glaciers, and dropped far from their birthplace when the ice melted. Some are the size of houses, standing alone in meadows or forests, silent visitors from another age. They look out of place, but they are storytellers, proof of journeys too slow for human eyes to have seen. The soil itself was remade. In some places, fine dust blown from the plains settled in thick layers, creating fertile loess that now feeds fields of crops. In others, rich black earth was left behind when glaciers ground stone to powder. Even today, our harvests grow from the work of ice, from its long patience in shaping the ground. Lakes fill the hollows it left behind. From the Great Lakes of North America to small hidden tarns high in the mountains, these waters are the footprints of glaciers. They mirror the sky, but they also mirror the past, their shapes and depths born of frozen carving. Even the coasts remember, where seas rose after the ice melted. Cliffs were cut, bays opened, islands formed. Shorelines shifted, and the edges of continents were redrawn by the weight and release of glaciers. The ocean itself still carries the rhythm of that melting, its levels higher than they had been for hundreds of thousands of years. Everywhere we look, the ice has left its mark. It is in the shape of valleys, the placement of stones, the fertility of fields, the outlines of lakes and rivers. Though the glaciers retreated, their presence endures in silence, written into the bones of the earth. The ice age is gone, but its memory is not. It lingers in landscapes, in fossils, in the stories carved into stone and preserved in ice cores deep beneath Greenland and Antarctica. The planet carries its history not as scars, but as reminders, patient records of the time when the world wore a crown of white. And so, when we walk through forests, when we row across lakes, when we farm the soil, we are still living in the shadow of the ice age. The giants are gone, the glaciers are smaller, but the memory remains, quiet, enduring, written into the land we call home. Though the ice age ended thousands of years ago, its echoes remain all around us. They are not always loud or obvious, but if you look closely, the traces of that frozen time still shape our world today. The animals remind us first. Reindeer, caribou, musk oxen, and Arctic foxes still walk the northern lands. They are survivors, descendants of those who once roamed beside mammoths and lions. Their coats, their migrations, their instincts all carry the mark of the cold age. In their endurance, we can still glimpse the resilience that allowed them to outlast the giants. The landscapes echo too. Every glacial valley, every moraine, every erratic boulder is a whisper of the age of ice. We hike through them, farm upon them, build cities beside them. often unaware that the very ground beneath us was shaped by frozen rivers of stone and time. Even the soil that feeds us carries the memory of glaciers that ground mountains to dust. The climate still feels its pull. Ice remains in Greenland, in Antarctica, on high mountains around the world. They are smaller than the sheets that once covered continents, but they are part of the same story. Remnants of the age when ice ruled. The melt and growth of those modern glaciers still affect seas and winds, reminding us that the planet breathes in rhythms older than we are. Human culture carries echoes as well. The cave paintings of Europe, the carvings of mammoths, the red ochre burials, all still speak of a time when survival meant facing the cold together. These are not just artifacts, but voices, still whispering across millennia, telling us what it meant to live through the silence of the ice. In their lines and colors, we see both the fear and the reverence our ancestors felt for the frozen world. Even our myths remember stories of great floods, of frozen wastes, of giants that once walked the earth. They echo the truths of the Ice Age, passed down through generations, reshaped by memory. They are fragments of a time when the world was colder and more uncertain. Our imagination has never forgotten what it meant to live beside glaciers. And in the present, we still feel the ice's influence. The Great Lakes of North America, the fjords of Scandinavia, the lowest plains of China, all of them are gifts of the Ice Age, landscapes shaped by its power. Without them, our continents would look different. Our rivers would flow differently. Our lives would be lived on another kind of earth. The echoes of the Ice Age remind us of two things. First, that change is natural, inevitable, and vast. The world we know is only one moment in a long story, and the land itself is always moving, always breathing. Second, that life endures, adapts, and transforms. The giants are gone, but new creatures thrive. The glaciers retreated, but forests returned. People found ways to not only survive, but to flourish, carrying fire and story into the new age. The Ice Age may feel far away, but it is still with us, in the animals that roam, the landscapes we walk, the stories we tell, and the very soil beneath our feet. It is not only history but memory, woven into the present, quiet but enduring. The story of the Ice Age carries lessons for the world we live in now. It reminds us that the Earth is not fixed. Its climate shifts, its landscapes change, its balance moves back and forth across the ages. The glaciers came, and then they went. The plains grew, and then the forest returned. Change is the oldest rhythm of the planet. But the Ice Age also shows us how fragile balance can be. A small shift in sunlight, a tilt of the earth, a change in currents. These were enough to spread ice across continents or to melt it away. The planet responded not in days, but in centuries, yet always with certainty. The lesson is simple. Even small changes, given time, can reshape the world. it also reminds us of resilience. Animals adapted, some vanishing, others enduring. Forests retreated and then advanced again. People learned new ways of living, shaped tools, built shelters, and carried stories that helped them survive. Life does not stop when the world changes. It bends, it shifts, it finds new rhythms. For us, living in a time of warming, the echoes of the Ice Age are clear. We know that the climate can turn cold or warm, and that every shift carries consequences for oceans, forests, animals, and people. We can see how rising seas reshape coastlines, just as they did at the end of the last ice age. We can see how species adapt or struggle when their homes change. The past is not only memory, it is a mirror showing us what change can bring. The Ice Age teaches humility. It shows us that we are part of a planet larger than ourselves, a world that breathes with rhythms far older than humanity. We did not shape the coming of glaciers, nor their retreat. But now, in our age, we do shape the balance with fire, with industry, with choices that ripple across the air and sea. The lesson is not fear, but awareness. That we are woven into the same fabric, bound to the same cycles, responsible for the balance we touch. It also offers hope. The Ice Age was harsh, and yet life endured. Forests grew again, rivers flowed again. People thrived in the warmth as they had in the cold. The earth is resilient, and so are we. Though change is certain, so too is renewal, adaptation, and the endless rhythm of life finding a way forward. When we look back at the Ice Age, we see not only a frozen world of mammoths and glaciers. We see a reminder that nothing lasts forever. Not the cold, not the warmth, not even the world as we know it now. And in that reminder lies both caution and comfort. The planet will change. The question is not whether, but how we choose to live within that change. The Ice Age gives us its wisdom softly, through stone and ice, through fossils and lakes, through echoes in the land. It tells us, be patient, be watchful, be humble, and above all, remember that the earth is alive, always moving, always breathing. The Ice Age is over, yet its dream lingers. When we walk through valleys, when we row across lakes, when we touch the stones carried by glaciers, we are still within its story. The giants may be gone, the glaciers smaller, but the memory remains, woven into the land, into our bones, into the sky itself. It was an age of silence, of wind across endless plains, of herds moving beneath the aurora. It was an age of firelight in caves, of hands pressed in paint, of voices singing against the cold. It was an age of balance, fragile and immense, where life bent beneath the weight of ice, yet never broke. We remember the mammoths, steady and slow, their tusks curved like moons. We remember the lions and wolves, shadows moving through snow. We remember the people, shaping stone and fire, painting animals that still run across cave walls today. They are not only fossils or artifacts. They are companions, still walking beside us in memory. The dream of the Ice Age is a reminder of time's patience. Glaciers do not hurry, yet they change mountains. Forests retreat and return. Seas rise and fall. The planet does not rush, yet it reshapes itself completely. And within that rhythm, life always finds a way, always listens, always adapts. When we close our eyes, we can still drift there. We can see the herds on the steppe stretching to the horizon. We can feel the hush of snow falling across a frozen plain. We can hear the crackle of fire in a cave, the murmur of voices telling stories against the night. It is far away, yet close enough to touch and dream. The Ice Age was not only an era of cold, it was an era of endurance, of beauty, of transformation. It shaped the earth we know today, carved its mountains, filled its lakes, wrote its story in stone and water. It shaped us as well, teaching patience, unity, and wonder in the face of hardship. And so its dream continues, not only in landscapes, not only in animals, but in us. We are the children of that age, carrying fire, carrying story, carrying memory. We are proof that even in the harshest world, life not only survives, but creates, remembers, and dreams. The Ice Age has ended, but its lullaby remains. A song of wind, of ice, of footsteps in snow, of fire in the dark. A song that tells us the earth is always changing, and we are always part of its change. Soft, steady, eternal. And as we listen, we drift, not only into history, but into sleep, carried gently by the rhythm of a world that breathes, a world that endures, a world that dreams.